Okay, good evening, everybody. We are going to start the Jefferson Elementary School District Special Governing Board meeting today, July 12th at 6:32 p.m. Superintendent Vidales, could I get members present, please?
Clayton Koo,
Here.
Marie Brizuela,
Here.
Andrea Jordan,
Here.
Maybell Manio,
Here.
and Manufa Lienga Ano Ai is absent today.
Okay, thank you so much. And do you mind also leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
Yeah, not a problem. Let me share the screen here. Okay. Put your right hand over your heart. Ready, pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And at this time, the governance team members will review the governance team meeting guidelines. And if no questions or discussions, we'll move to item 5, approval of the agenda.
Make a motion to, oops,
Sorry, you go ahead. I'll defer.
you want me to go?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I'll make a motion that we approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, perfect. That was unanimous. Thank you. Do we have any speaker cards this evening?
We do not.
Okie doke. So then we'll move on to general functions, our equity network study session. Governance team will reflect on effective governance practices and build deeper content awareness of educational equity. Thank you again, ladies, for joining us this evening.
Thank you. Good to be here. So you're turning it over to us now, huh? Okay. Great. So yes, we are pleased to be with you. It is our 4th session. Can you believe that? Unfortunately, good things come to an end, but we're not leaving you. And so we're really pleased to have gone on this journey with you thus far, focusing on equity and tying it in with your governance responsibilities. Of course, every time you're looking at something and making decisions through the lens of equity, it's from also your governance lens, because it will look a little bit different from the superintendent and his staff. But doing this equity work is so important. And again, commending you for agreeing to be on this journey that I've said before is it's not a cul-de-sac road that we're on. There's no turning around. You can pull off and kind of slow it down a little bit, but you've embarked upon this journey. So we really appreciate that. A lot of districts want to do this work, but not really, the readiness isn't there yet. And you guys are definitely well on your way and very committed, that you've shown us the last several sessions we've been with you. So we definitely see that. So Nicole, jump in and say your words before we really start finishing this work this evening.
Yeah, I just kind of ditto to what Deborah said. I think I'm always really excited about governance teams engaging in this work with their superintendent, because ultimately this results in a better experience, an equitable experience for every kid, right? And it starts at the top. And so it's always kind of surreal to be with governance teams because, you know, you're the power players, right? And so what you do and the vision you set for years to come, generations to come, will ultimately happen. And so just today, I always, you know, have that bittersweet moment of, okay, it's our last session, and you know, we're going to roll up our sleeves, do a lot of working today to look at our equity statement or equity policy, but ultimately leave you with like a stepping off point, you know, to really take this work to the next level and believe that you all have the bandwidth and the capacity to do this work, you know, as a team moving forward, and that equity will never leave, right? You know, I think that's always something that Deborah and I always worry about is when we leave, will equity leave, right? Will effective governance practices leave? And it's like, no, you know, you all have the tools, you have the vision, you have the passion for this work, and you are locking arms with your superintendent. That's a big deal. And every board does not have that. Trust us. I mean, it is not happening everywhere. And to be able to do this type of work, you do have to be a united team. So really excited today. So I'll be brief so that Deborah can actually get us started, and then we're gonna kind of tag team as usual. So get ready, you know, sit back, relax. I know it's an evening, but we're gonna get a lot done tonight. So excited to hang out with you again.
Yeah, well, great. Thanks, Nicole. And you know, it is it's tough for governance teams today, especially with a lot of pushback on doing this work. And so if you haven't felt any of it, it's not if, it's probably when it's going to occur. And that's okay, because we're going to prepare you. You know, this whole thing about the critical race theory, a lot of boards are being attacked with that. And my what I share with boards is, are you doing critical race theory? They're like, no. I say, well, say that. Because you can't argue with somebody over something that you're not doing, but it just seems to be a topic that people are just taking it and running with it. But it will give you an opportunity to engage with your community to let them know what you are actually doing. And so it's nothing to be fearful of it, but just know what you're teaching and be able to have that kind of discussion. It doesn't have to become an argument. And so, so how is everyone doing? It's been a month since we've been together, right? June 2nd, I believe. And so I'm just checking in with everyone. How you doing? You look good, but we know how we can camouflage things. So how is Clayton doing?
I'm good. A little tired from work, but it's the summer, so I can't complain. Yeah.
Okay. What about you, Andrea?
I guess I'm just like Clayton. Work is exhausting, but I'm going on vacation soon, so I feel a little better now.
When you think about what's coming down the road, that's always a good inspirational thing. What about you, Maybelle?
Likewise, and I did a silly thing and enrolled in Cornell this summer, so I thought I could kind of skate by, but they actually expect a lot because it's Cornell. But so I've been doing a lot of work, but it's good work and it's good for me in my career. So
Good.
I surprised kind of situation, but kind of jealous of Andrea taking vacation because I don't think I'm gonna be able to do that this summer, but it's okay. I hope you enjoy yourself though.
Tell her to send you lots of pictures. You can imagine yourself there. That'll be your getaway. How about that? Well, that's great. Congratulations on your educational journey. Just think about the outcome, what you're doing, why you're doing this work. Yeah. What about you, Marie?
Well, I've doing a lot of things, so I've been busy. Have a lot of things to look back on to what I have accomplished or what I've seen our district accomplish, and I'm proud of that. So I'm ready to keep on going.
All right.
This is 40 years working on the school board, so
40?
40. I think I get an award for the longest serving board member. I don't know. I didn't try to do that. It just happened.
That's not what you intended when you took your first oath of office, huh?
I think my whole focus in my life has been working with children.
Yeah.
No matter what I did all these years, it's always involved children, far above and beyond school board.
Mhm,
That's what
mhm.
really keeps me going, is children and how we can help
Absolutely.
them. So I
And,
have a
and
legacy of that I can look back at and say I made a difference in the lives of many children. Yeah,
absolutely.
so that's not, I'm not bragging. I'm just saying that's my focus.
Absolutely.
You don't just get on the school board because you want to be a politician. You better be there for kids
Absolutely.
and make sure that every child is successful.
And that's why you can do it for 40 years, because you're doing it for the right reasons.
And everyone should. And I would say in the last 40 years, there probably were people that weren't inclined for that. Maybe it was a stepping stone, or maybe it was just something they wanted to try. But I think if you're really dedicated to children, whatever you do, you'll find some real pleasure. And that's all I can say is I just feel like I've done things for children.
All right, well, great. That is awesome. And you have a great team who, and I don't know if they plan on staying on for 40 years.
Well, they don't have to, but they're doing a great job too. And
absolutely.
I'm proud of our board members, and I'm happy that the ones that we have are there. I hope that they do stay for a while. And if not, whatever time they're here, they're gifted, you know.
Wonderful. What about you, Bernie? What's going on?
I just got back from a week of vacation, so I'm trying to readjust to work life, and first day back, have a board meeting. So
a gift. How about that gift? A welcome back from vacation gift.
Yeah.
You look very relaxed, and I was wondering if you had been on vacation. So and I'm glad you found the time, because sometimes superintendents don't find the time to go on vacation and regroup, and you have to find time for yourself. So I'm glad you were able to do that. And so normally, and I'm not going to do this today, I'm not going to put up that screen, the slide that talks about the 4 agreements. By now, you should have those memorized. So tell me, there are 4 agreements. Do you know what they are? When we talk about this moving from safe to brave space, what are these agreements that we always begin talking about to have this conversation? So unmute yourself and just tell me what the agreements are. You remember.
I know. I remember.
Stay engaged. Does that remind you of something? Experience discomfort, right? Speaking your truth, and expect and accept non-closure, which we're going to feel a lot of that by the end of our session today. And so just remembering those 4 agreements, again, when we have the conversations with you, but I always like to remind you, it's also when you are engaging with other people, kind of think about these conversations or these agreements when you are engaged in conversations that can be very difficult for individuals, really paying attention that there is some discomfort in talking about equity, which usually always goes to race, which is a part of it, or it could just be about conversations that just people aren't ready to have. And so we have to really be staying engaged in that. And as you're doing this work, staying focused on the goal of this equity work. Okay. And again, experiencing that discomfort, it is okay to be uncomfortable. And as you probably realize by now, with this being our 4th session, if there isn't some discomfort, there isn't really much change that will happen. That's where the change happens. When you're uncomfortable, you kind of get out of your comfort zone and experience some things that perhaps from a different perspective or something like that. But it's okay to experience discomfort in engaging in these conversations, because we've gone so many years, especially in the education realm, of not talking about systems that perpetuate inequity, and we just haven't talked about it. We just kind of let it go. So it should be some discomfort. It's that time to make everyone a little bit uncomfortable. And speaking your truth, of course, is not just sharing what you think someone wants to hear. It's actually speaking from your perspective, your lived experience, and realizing when you someone shares with you what their truth is, that there's no judgment or anything like that. It's just a way of engaging on a different level with individuals. When they share with you where they are, speaking their truth based upon their experience, we have to receive it that way and try to listen to for understanding instead of responding and things of that nature. And then again, the expecting and accepting non-closure. It's been years, decades of this work that we are embarking upon that really needs to be right. It's not about addressing people. It's about addressing systems that have just not supported children in the way that all children in the way that it should. And we're just having a laser focus on this at this time when we're going down this equity journey. So, you know, we can't change things immediately, but the key thing is that you're like throwing that pebble in the water where you're going to see it's going to be a ripple effect. It's not going to be huge waves, but it definitely will be change will happen. You are changing the foundation so that it will be able to be sustained. Either when you're off the board or whatever, you want this to be your legacy, that you're creating the role that's going to lead to an exceptional education journey for all of your students who come through your school system. And so focusing on equity, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint, of course. It takes time. But I know you're up to this journey. So just as a reminder of those 4 agreements, it always kind of centers us and help us be prepared to have conversations. And as we get ready to talk about your equity statement and your equity policy, how the statement flows into your policy and really is guiding the work of your policy, it will help you stay focused on your why. Why are you doing this work and the purpose and things of that nature? But before we get to your equity policy, we did ask you to read an article called The Curb Effect. So did you have a chance to read that article? Yes, great, because I would like to have just a discussion about that. I thought it was very interesting. I love reading articles. So every time Nicole finds it, I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to read this article. And I just stop what I'm doing. I absolutely love reading. And then I make the connection to like, what does this have to do with this? And what kind of takeaways do I have? So it was a really good, the curb effect, the curb cut effect. Like, what does that have to do with equity? What does that have to do with governing? What does it have to do with schools? What's the connection here? And so, but as you read, is basically when decisions too are made, and we say that it's for one group, actually other people reap the benefits as well. And that's a good thing. So there are a lot of things in this country today, or policies or practices, that decisions are being made that we think is specifically for one group, but others will reap the benefits. And that's a way to really think about how are we impacting all of our students, but it is okay to zero in on one specific group. And that's what this article really focused on. So let's just have a discussion about your takeaways from this article. What did you glean from it, and how did you make the connection to the work you're doing, either some decisions you guys have to make or have already made that fall into what this article was trying to really carve out for you? So let's just have a discussion about this. So anyone just can jump right on in and give us your thoughts. Who would like to go? I know we're tired. We can't be tired already now. Come on, you guys. Come on. Yeah, come on. It's not almost 9 o'clock here. I'm staying up almost at midnight with you. So, all right, Clayton, you're in the middle of my screen. So you know what? I'm looking right at you. What you got for me, Clayton?
Sure. I know in the article there was a section about transportation and transit and sort of its impact on the central city, and how even though a decision sort of like helping people within certain parts of a metro area are meant to help other people, in many ways it could actually have a ripple effect across a lot of other people. For example, I mean, even in this article, probably talking about mix about like big cities, impacts on different types of communities, whether they're lower income, upper income, sort of understanding that you're trying to make the benefit for a certain group of people, but in the process it actually is intended to help everybody else in the process. But there's a lot of other factors that go beyond just even that one little decision that you're going to make.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, absolutely. Do you think they went through, just out of, off the top of your head, what do you think a process they went through to really think about focusing on that transportation issue and who they were trying to address? Just processes, because this is the same thing that as a governing body that you guys will have to go through.
I think it's a mix of just understanding who can potentially get the most benefit out of it. And also understanding like who also has the most to get out of it.
Yeah.
There's political power in any city or government that you run. Figure out how best you can sort of support those who may not necessarily have the greatest voice, but be able to sort of help them out, whether it's economically or like in terms of social like growth, in terms of this and that. There's a bunch of other stuff that goes beyond just that thing alone.
Absolutely. Perfect. Spot on. Thank you for that. See, it wasn't that bad. Now you're off the hot seat right now. Thanks. Anyone else? Who's next? Who wants to just chime in there? What did you pick up?
I can go. So when I read the article, the word that came to me most is investment. Investing in the right resources and things that are going to help things move forward. There's a part in the article that talks about how the GI Bill benefited specific people, how there were Black veterans that got it, but their subsidy was much lower than others. And that was a way for a lot of people to come back and rebuild and have homes. And that was not afforded to people of color. And so I think it goes both ways, in the sense that if you don't make those investments up front and make it equal across the board, we're going to continue to see these inequities, because we're picking and choosing who gets to benefit the most, rather than saying everyone gets the same benefit, which will obviously in turn have the same effect positively, in the sense that everyone will have access to opportunities regardless of what they look like, their disabilities, their sexuality. And that plays in so many different scenarios that we've seen in policies that have been made in this country.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And what do you think they could have done with the GI Bill? Is perfect one. They said, well, we had it was a policy. It was there. It was available. And but what happens when that's all you do is say it's there, access is there. If they don't get it, we're not checking. What do you think they could have done differently to make sure who was actually taking advantage of it?
I think they could have done, they should have used their data, because obviously they know where the money is going. They know how they're breaking it down. The fact that they have the data on, the less subsidy going to, the Black veterans, it's obviously they knew what was going on. And so it's now it's a matter of morality. It's like, what are you doing, and why are you doing that? I guess my question. I know that's very blunt and just out there, but that's how I felt. I'm like, who came up with that specific difference when they were giving out those subsidies? And if we didn't think of that, and if we just said these subsidies are needed regardless, these people have served their country and they need to come back and rebuild, they all get the same thing. So
Absolutely. You're spot on. And you know, it also makes you pose the question, intentionality. You know, this is where it gets uncomfortable, where you have to have these conversations. Well, whether it was intentional or not, this is what's happening. Unintentional consequences, because we didn't check the data to say who was really benefiting, and it's not benefiting everyone. We should have done something else. So this is just the same type of mindset when you're putting policies in place, to really continue to dig in and look at that data and say, okay, it's there, but who's taking advantage of it? And are there some obstacles there that's hindering others? Whether it's they don't know, are we not reaching them? You know, all of these things, this is the mindset of what needs to take place. So whether it was intentional or not, we see what the outcome was. And again, who are the individuals who are at the bottom, who do not who do not get an opportunity to advance in some free opportunity to have the American dream. Again, these are things that are continuing to happen in different areas, you know, in the housing, in the medical, education. You see, all of these are connected. So, and education is just not isolated. So absolutely. So thank you for that. Who else would like to go?
There was so much to this article, so I could, you know, have a response for every little thing that they talked about. I found it funny that they only called out politicians, because there are so many other players involved that drive these policies, right? Like PACs and other economic players like central banks and people like that. And like just with the GI Bill, there was redlining. Asians couldn't buy houses until the 70s. So even though there's equity now, it's been a staggered start. So there's a legacy effect when it comes to equity that we have to also be mindful of. We can't just be like, we did it and it's done, and so everybody's equitable now. It's like, we started from way back here, so now it's a catch-up game. That's kind of what I took out of it. There's so much more, but I don't want to.
I know, but you know, and I think we shared with you a couple sessions ago that the video on the race, the what is it called? What is that called, Nicole? The actual race. I believe we shared that video.
The unequal opportunity race.
Right. Remember that?
Yep.
And when you said maybe the starting point, well, yeah, we all were on the track. We all hear the same gun go off the run, but you know, we're waiting because we're constantly trying to catch up. And you're right. It was so many players involved. And this is where accountability is so important. So once you see, you know, always connecting it back to the school system too, when you're having policies or regulations, practices in place, you know, accountability is so important. It's not just one group. We're going to hold everyone accountable. What role did you play in this? And you're right. They could have listed a litany of individuals who play and continue to today. If we know these things continue to happen. And so absolutely. So thank you for bringing that one up. That was key as well. What about you, Bernie or Marie?
Me? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so there's a whole lot to this whole thing, okay, that I can see. Number one is for equity, we have to, first of all, invest in our students, make sure that every child is important, which they are, and we have to give them the resources available to them so that they can succeed. So we need community to come with us. We need to, our district has been fortunate that we've had a lot of programs. We had the Learn Not to Burn program that helped students, help save the family's life. But we brought in, I remember asking our school district for the teachers to agree to have the program put into the schools. And they did agree to it. And thank goodness, because it did save the life of a family. So we need to look at those programs that we can bring to our district through our families, through the community, that will make more of an education than just going and reading a book.
Mhm.
So I can go on and on about the different things we've had. We had a program that said, "Don't laugh at me." That was what Peter, Paul, and Mary that started that. I have all of their materials and stuff because that was a big thing in our district at one time. And it made a difference. And we've had different programs that meant that we're teaching our students that you don't make fun of people, you don't, and so the kids themselves would get up and surround somebody who was not doing the right thing. To say, don't do this. So I think that the more we engage in that point of view, it doesn't matter about race, doesn't matter about religion, it doesn't matter about what ethnic background you are. It's about that every child is equal. And we bring everyone together. And I think our district has been good about that. Not that we're perfect, but I think we're very close to it. And so that the more we can engage on making everybody feel that they are special, and especially even with our students that are handicapped in any way that they are. I have a friend of a family that son was born without arms and legs, how he went through a lot of things to be who he is today, and got to go and play an instrument and do all the things that the children do. We don't turn our back on somebody, no matter what it is. There's nothing that will stop a child from being able to be successful and learn and go on and be successful, be a great person. But it takes all of us to work together and set those goals. And I think I kind of say some of that stuff once in a while, not in the same way I'm telling you, to let every child know that each one of them will be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. And then it is okay to make policies or decisions about a subgroup of children, some children that you're not serving. Just with the example of even what this article was talking about, the cutout. I remember that too, when, it was for wheelchairs, but then what about the ladies in the strollers, people who are on skateboards, who wants to jump down the curb? I mean, sometimes you want to jump off the curb because that's fun, but if you couldn't, or I know ladies like me, if I'm walking in high heels, I'm going to look for that cut, So again, making some decisions for us, but one specific group, but you see how others benefit, and that's okay. But yes, for you guys, your focus is on educating your children, your resources, your programs. Sometimes a program is really designed for one specific subgroup, and that's okay. But that doesn't mean that you're saying no other kids can participate. But it's just doing that curb cut effect, as this article is talking about, how to weaving that into the mindset of from where you guys are viewing things from the governance lens, and that equates to all of this work with equity, making sure that there's access and that there's fairness, and making sure that people are being held accountable. We're not putting obstacles in the way. So absolutely, I appreciate you sharing that. What about you, Bernie?
Yeah, this article resonated with me because it's an illustration that we use quite a bit in our school district when we talk about making modifications to instruction or to the classroom to support the success of one student, and that often that modification supports many students. Like two examples are we have some students who have difficulty with hearing. So one modification that is made is to provide teachers with an audio system where their voice is amplified. And so when their voice is amplified in the classroom, certainly the student with the hearing issue is able to hear the teacher much more clearly, and it gets rid of some of the distortion that they get when they hear the natural sound, the natural. but oftentimes, and then that system passes on from year to year to a different teacher as the student passes through the classroom. But we've had teachers say, can I keep it? Because I find that I don't have to strain my voice to get to the back of the room, the student in the back of the room. So it helps me. And I know that it helps a lot of students also in my classroom who can hear me more clearly. And are, though, even though they're normal hearing children, having the sound be clear and amplified supports them and their understanding. So that's one example where I've seen an adaptation made for one student be supportive for others. And, and another application of that was with, coming back into school during COVID, teachers who had those systems and teachers around them said, we would like those because it would help us if we have to teach with our mask on, because we can have the microphone inside our mask and our students can hear us. And they're like, can we get one for each student? Because we can't hear them either. But
oh my gosh, brilliant.
yeah,
Great.
So, so I think, things like that just remind us of the curb cut. And so the other one is, just with our lesson design, if we have students who need, sometimes we make modifications because the student needs to have more of a hands-on approach, a more active approach to the lesson content, and teachers make those modifications. They realize that many more students actually appreciate that. So, they're the joggers or, the bicyclists or skateboarders that are fully able, but can, access the content in a different way, in a way that fits more who they are when you make modifications. We have students that have attention difficulty. Teachers sometimes make modifications like, I'm going to keep my lessons shorter so that students don't have to pay attention for 25, 30 minutes. I'm going to try to keep my lessons to 15, then have some movement, or allow a student, initially one student, to have some flexible seating options throughout the classroom. Like, rather than me having to yell at the kid every 5 minutes because they're up and around, so, okay, Johnny or Joanne, you can sit here, or you can sit here, or you can sit here, or you can sit here, and it's up to you to decide when you need to move. Find that other students, when you open it up to everybody else and say, we have lots of seating options, we have desk seating options, we have pillows in the back of the room, we have yoga balls, we have different places where you can sit, and you find where you fit the best. Those are all examples of modifications that were made with one student in mind to support them and a particular challenge they were facing. But as those modifications were put in place, the benefits of that, when it's made available more broadly, supports more students. And there's very few, and if I can think of any, I'll try, modifications made for one student that only support that one student.
Right.
Those modifications that we make end up supporting multiple students.
Yeah, those are fantastic examples, and I am going to use those. I'll give you credit, though. But those are brilliant, absolutely, and again, make it so relevant with the mask on. There's a challenge, and then you think about kids who really it hasn't been. They haven't been diagnosed as having hearing difficulties or something. But what if they're just looking at your lips move? All of those things now, there's modification. So I really like that about letting the students have it as well. And then the seating modification, because every child, like, well, I might be feeling some kind of way one day I come in. I might just want to curl up on a little pillow, but I'm still going to be engaged. So that all is really, really supporting students being able to still learn. and no matter what they're physically going through. And so those modifications are extremely important to be able to do that, even changing your voice, you know, so that they don't feel like it's monotone and just lecturing, being creative. All of that is finding different ways to engage students and maybe walk, you know, it's so many different ways. I'm so glad you brought it up. I was visualizing this as you were talking, and those, again, you were thinking about that curb cut effect for modifying for one, but all the kids now. And so that really takes away from that one child feeling like, oh, you really make me feel like I'm so different, in a negative way, different. And so that eliminated that, because that is just a brilliant way. And I'm just so pleased to hear that you're already doing that. I'm hoping that happens in a lot of other schools, but I'm so pleased that you're very much aware. And you just talk about it like, oh, this is just who we are. It just goes back to say what Marie said, that you guys are almost perfect. You know, and that's brilliant. I love that. And so
I wouldn't say we're perfect. I would say we're
Almost.
continuously
striving
continuously
for it.
improving. How's that?
Continuously improving. There you go.
So,
absolutely.
You know, one of the initiatives that we've started recently, and sort of based again on this principle, is, and Nicole, you might be familiar with it, is the idea of universal design. So, you know, things like the curb cut is a universal design principle, right? That impacts lots of different populations. The zigzags, the ramps for going up the stairs is also another universal design principle that some architects have taken that and have made really beautiful sort of ramps going up these like majestic, like, you know, you think about going up to the US Capitol or something, and you know, they probably have some kind of ugly ramp on the side, but now people who are designing stately buildings like that build the ramp into the staircase, and it just becomes a beautiful piece of architecture that allows people access. And so we're utilizing that principle and trying to build it in our classrooms, called universal design for learning. Like, how do we design our lessons so that all students get access to it? It's not just one way of teaching it. You know, there might be a variety of ways of teaching something, and there might be some ways of teaching that allow for more access than others. So
absolutely.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Nicole.
I'll add one is Bernie. It's funny you mentioned that. When I was thinking about an experience when I was an elementary principal, and how this was my like really big aha moment of implementing GLAD training for our teachers, and this was all centered around our English learners. And my particular school had a large number of English learners, so you know it really applied to a lot of kids. But what was powerful is when you watched it in action, and it's like a whole cycle of strategies that teachers use. But you talk about the curb effect. It's like, oh my God, yes, we're focused on English learners, right? The budget was for English learners for this program to have our teachers train. But ultimately, when you watched it in action, it was good for every single kid. Like, you know, because it's all about like the students being able to produce like oral language, because you know our English learners often are kind of silenced in classrooms, right? And so you can't learn a language if you don't get to talk, right? So oral language production, like that's great for English learners, and it's also great for all kids, because then there's the academic piece of it, right? So we want them to use academic language. Well, if you don't apply that to all kids, like you're really kind of missing it. And so, kind of long story short, I saw that was a great investment, and I often use as an example for school districts who want to invest in professional learning, specifically for your teachers. Yes, it's focused on English learners, but it was good for all kids. I mean, you talk about just phenomenal transformation of classrooms where kids were allowed to be like facilitators of their own learning, right? And I mean, just visuals, right? So it was a lot of visuals and charts, you name it. And it's like, that's good for everybody, because you know what? I may not be an English learner, but I'm a visual learner, right? So that works for me, right? I may not be an English learner, but I may be that quiet student who you don't ever hear my voice. right? So there's strategies built in where all kids' voices are included, because remember, English learners have to talk, right? So it's a great example of where there's some things I think you all can consider down the road of looking at this concept of this article to think about how we also can convince people who may not be believers in this work that it's good for all kids, right? And I think that's what's important, that people don't feel like I'm going to lose something for doing equity focused work because you're doing something for them. And that is a real reality when we talk about the pushback. And Deborah, you mentioned the critical race theory pushback. A lot of it is centered around thinking it's really focused on one group of kids, and it's about blaming and shaming a group of kids. It's like, no, this is actually good for all kids. And we're not really teaching critical race theory because that's the narrative. But the reality is equity work can sometimes be translated into we're teaching that. And so ultimately, it's really about making sure that people understand this work is good for all kids. And I think that's the challenge you'll have as a governance team, and the language you use when the pushback comes is that this is good for all kids. That curb was for those that were considered to have a disability. And the reality is that it was good for everybody, right? And if we can get that work to transfer to equity work in education, I think we'll be winning. It will transform the system. It's going to take time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That is so important. And you think about, other policies nationally that have been put in place, and one that comes to mind with me is affirmative action. Okay, we thought it was for one group, but so many others have benefited from it, and no one's complaining about that. So how do we equate that to with the education when you're talking about this equity work, that it is for all children, and it is okay if we specifically say this subgroup, because if we are really saying all kids, why when we're focusing on something, why does it not apply to this group then? But, so again, like Nicole said, it is the language that is used, being very clear about what you're doing and be able to articulate that the big picture is you're looking for your job is to educate all children. And that has not changed. That doesn't change. And that's a hard stop, period. Now, your data is telling you that you are missing the mark a little bit in this particular area. So if kids are saying we're not getting this that is going to help us in our education journey, why would you not stop and pause and really look at the data and engage with students or whomever, a community member, whoever's telling you we're missing the mark on it, and then you do something about it. All of this is positive. So again, it is the language. I like this one very short sentence in this article toward the end. It said, the antidote to inequality is equity. And that's exactly what it is. The antidote to inequality is equity. And this is what we're focusing on. And so this article, you all of you really connected it well with what you're doing. You're in the mindset of what does this mean when we translate it into this equity work that we're doing. And this is a perfect segue into when we talked about language. Guess what? You guys have been dealing with language that's called your equity statement. Boy, isn't that the language? That is the hook. As you know, if you're into music, you know how you got to have that hook. When you're into maybe if you have to write any thesis papers or anything, that first paragraph is the hardest thing to write. Other than that, the rest of it, when I was writing, it took me forever to get that first paragraph or two, but then I could write for hours. But that's that hook of making sure that you are representing it well, and that you've included everyone without going into it deeply, because your policy is going to say this is now how we're going to do it. This is the what of it. And so we're going to transition over to the work that you've already started last month when you did a really good draft of your equity statement based upon the conversation, everyone's input. And now we're going to look at, now you made some suggestions on what it could look like. And then perhaps you're going to continue to edit, because it takes time to keep tweaking it. But then just remember that it needs to be broad enough, but make sure you're not excluding anyone, but also make sure it is truly who you are, who you're representing, because your policy is going to have to support that. And then that's where the work is. That's where your goals will be. And so reading your equity statement, will the community have an understanding of what you're actually doing? Will the staff understand, okay, I see where I fit in to this, that we are all, because we all will be held accountable for this statement that the board is saying, this is who we are. And so, of course, that's why it's so important when you put that statement out there and you give it the seal of approval, then that means that you have to now model it. So I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Nicole, and we're going to talk about your statement, your language, which is so important. So thank you so much for engaging in the conversation about the curb cut effect.
Yeah, I agree. I love listening to the dialogue and hearing your perspective. And I love, again, the connections you made to your own work, because I think that's really important, that anything we share, it needs to be something you can see in action in your own space. I'm glad that there was a connection. And so what I'm going to do is just share my screen to remind you about where your equity statement work kind of fell into this in terms of governance, because remember, everything we share is in the lens of effective governance. So I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. Is that showing up okay?
No.
Yeah. Okay, good. Sometimes it freezes on me. So just reminding you, when we talk about our equity statement, this was part of our discussion when we looked at the 8 characteristics of effective boards, right? And there was a whole full report that we referenced. I'm not sure if you had a chance to look at it or not. It wasn't designed for us to discuss the full report. But remember, as this is our last study session, we want you to remember that the outcomes are your statement, your policy, and obviously having kind of a plan, which is something that we'll talk about, how you develop a deeper plan. But the reality is that all of this is centered around effective governance. So we always want to remind you that as we go through this work, that what we're sharing comes from what boards have done to close achievement gaps specifically. And these characteristics are really important. And the outcomes of effective boards always include having kind of a common vision, a statement, which is what we call the equity statement, right? Common language to say, this is what we're doing. Here's our vision, right? And then we'll talk a little bit about the policy in a moment. But what I want to do is I want to share with you again what we did in our last session that helped you evolve your equity statement. And the hope today is that you have an opportunity to kind of, I would say, finalize your statement to say, okay, we want to start taking this now to our stakeholders to make sure we get input first before we adopt it. Okay, so these were some of the things I shared before. So just want to remind you is that, you know, your statement, does it communicate clearly? This common language that you can apply as a lens to everything you do. Okay, specifically, you're the governance team, so you look at policy, but can our teachers apply this to their instruction, right? Can our parents apply this to the work they do as a partner with us? Do our kids actually, are they able to apply the concept of equity to what they do in school, right? So equity needs to be something that is common, that anybody can apply to everything we do. So it's not just about discipline, it's not just about instruction, it's not just about nutrition, it's about everything. Okay, so it's very broad. It's something that can show up as a component in your equity policy. And so we'll talk about that in our latter part of the session, is where does this fit in your policy? Okay, this is your statement. It should be a component that shows up there. But it also is kind of a standalone as well, right? This is something that could show up on letterhead, on your website, in any statement you make. Again, this policy, this statement is something that shows up in your policy, but it is a lens and it's a language you can use everywhere. Is it student-centered? So we're going to relook at this again. Is it centered around our kids? Because ultimately we know, for example, our adults need to have equity applying to them. Obviously, we don't have healthy adults in our system. It's hard to have healthy kids. So being student-centered is very important, that ultimately the outcome is always about our children. So go back to the curb effect and go back to the concept of that curb was for people who were in a wheelchair, right? And so it was centered around them, but it was still good for everybody. So same concept, it needs to be centered around our kids, but it actually will be good for everyone when we focus on our students who are our primary kind of client. Does it call out the inequities in the data? And this is going to be a hard one because sometimes we want to have like a laundry list again of people we want to call out in the data, right? So you have to think about, okay, how does this apply to all kids? But then how does it talk about closing the gaps? So I love using the elephant and blind man analogy, because what you'll notice is, again, the elephant, remember, it has a lot of different parts, and it's like, where do we prioritize our work, right? And so I often talk about, you know, the elephant has different parts, so the whole elephant matters. But if the ear is bleeding, then we have to prioritize the ear, and we got to make sure that we mend up that ear if it's bleeding. And that's when we talk about explicitly calling out what equity gaps we want to close in the data. Can you measure your statement? So if I said in 5 years, Deborah and I come back, we do some equity walks, we talk to you, we interview people, we see your surveys you put out, we look at your data. Can we see the equities happening, right? And that's important. Can we measure it in data? So that's going to be the harder part of your work moving forward. Is it something that's aligned with your current vision and mission? So often we talk about, when you're doing this work, this should not be some standalone kind of thing. Like, it should align with everything that you've already kind of adopted as a district, right? Anything that we talk about in our vision, in our mission, it should align, okay? They should be almost one and the same. And some boards actually evolve their equity statement to be their vision and mission statement. I mean, it actually is what it essentially is saying. And then again, I mentioned this earlier, our next steps in this work is not just to have the equity statement draft, it actually is to include other people in this conversation. So we want to have your students talk about what equity means to them. So we encourage listening sessions, right? We encourage opportunities to do exit tickets in classrooms. We encourage you to do surveys, observations, ask your parents, ask your community members, ask your teachers, ask your principals. Everybody should be a part of this. Because ultimately, as a board, when you say, hey, we want to apply this to all things in our district, if it doesn't resonate with a certain group, then we may need to rethink, like, oh, maybe we have some more input we need to give. So what I'm going to share with you is where you started. And you remember we talked about, you know, what equity meant. You individually started with your kind of own statements, and we took them and put them together. And this is what you came up with back in May. So I just want to let you take a look at that one. And I'm going to show you what you evolved into June, and then we'll talk about what we may want to do to make any other additional statements. While y'all are reading that, I'm going to turn my fish tank off because it sounds like it's going to explode. I'm not sure what's going on. All right, so notice what you had back in May, okay? And remember we had a discussion and you all kind of went through, it's like, yeah, we want to evolve the bullet point number 1. We want to make it more student and community friendly. Do you remember that conversation? And so then this is where you evolved it in June. So I want you to take a look there. Here's where we kind of simplified it. We try to make it reflect some of the samples you all looked at. Just want to give you all opportunity to talk a little bit about literally what we may want to massage one more time before we say, let's go take it and start asking our constituents and our different stakeholders what they think equity is and how much it aligns with where your statement is. Okay, so I'm going to pause and I'm going to allow you to just kind of read it and then jump in and tell me what's coming up for you in terms of revisions we still may want to make. What do we like? What do we want to take out? What questions do we have?
I have, I guess, a statement and a question. So the first bullet point, I like it. I do feel like it is a bit redundant in the sense that it says underserved student groups, and then it's like policies that are fair for all students. It's like, well, I mean, I'm assuming that if we're interrupting it for student groups, that the policies that we're creating will be fair for all of the students. But I guess we're saying that word twice in the sentence, and I don't know how the other board members feel about that.
I think, Andrea, that ties into the curb effect article, where we are intentionally serving underserved students, but that this would benefit all anyway. Is that what everybody else?
No, I guess that makes sense. Okay.
I have always appreciated how clear and concise we are as a governing board. I don't know, I see all of the other examples from like Cincinnati and Ohio, and they're long. So do we need that much, or does this look lazy on our part? I don't know.
That's a great question. One of the things Deborah and I love is that boards get an opportunity to roll their sleeves up and make it their own. So there's no right or wrong way to do this. If you literally had one sentence, if that's what equity means, then that's what it is. Remember this statement, and I didn't say this earlier, this was really centered around like a structure, how the National Equity Project did it. So you remember that they said equity is this, and then they had kind of what the work looks like. So Maybelle, one thing that you will see here is you almost have like a vision and a mission statement combined, is why you see that. So I would say my opinion professionally is that it's not too much, it's not too little, but it's yours. And I think that's what's important to recognize. And all those different examples were what they were. I think you still have to make it your own. So there's no right or wrong way to do it. I would say the only wrong way is to not have one, right? So I think it's fine, actually. I think you all have to make it your own and own it. It may take some time, even after today, and that's okay. But ultimately, remember, does this apply to everything we do when we talk about equity in our district? Does that help a little bit? Okay.
Thank you.
Anyone else, please jump in. So what do you like? What do you like? What's missing? What questions you have?
You know, I have a comment about Trustee Jordan had a comment about the first bullet and about the last part says that creating policies and practices that are fair for all students. I don't know. The more I think about it, I feel like, is fair the right word? I'm trying to think about if that word sounds like, I don't know. I'm trying to figure out and think about if there's a better word to describe that. Because I feel like fair could be seen as fair for one group of people, but also not for another. And I'm trying to see if there's another word that might be better suited.
Yeah.
I can't figure out.
Yeah, good question. One of the things you may find if you all have some non-closure in this one is as you hear your students and your parents come up with words, that may help you with what is the right word. Remember, the ones that are in red was trying to make it more like student and community friendly. So the word fair kind of was a little bit more broad, but yet at the same time, and it's not as complex as impartial, right? So that was kind of filling that word in. And so you're right, like, is that the right word? Maybe not. So I think you all can wrestle with that. You know, maybe there's another word that resonates. I think that curb effect article, one of the things I like about that is it gives some other language to consider too. So you may find that there's some other word that really, you know, comes into play. Again, equity and equality are not the same thing, but as Deborah mentioned, you know, the antidote to inequality is equity, right? So like, how do we find that word? So I don't know. Y'all chime in. What do you think? Maybe fair is not the right word.
Well, if you don't want to say fair, is it equal for all students or something like that? If you want to say, what you're trying to say, that everybody should get the same thing, what they need, right? Is that what we're trying to say? All students should get,
And that's the struggle. So Marie, I'm going to go back to this one, and I don't think I have the larger version, but take a look at that picture. of the
okay,
kids
oh,
on
this
the
is better
baseball
because
field.
half of the screen was gone here. Okay,
Yeah, so take a look at the difference between equity and equality. So I always go, is equality the word? Even though equality, we're still on that mission to some degree, right? Sometimes we don't have equality where everyone has the same thing, but is giving them the same thing, is that good for all kids? Right. And that's the thing you have to kind of wrestle with. Now, the curb effect kind of gives you an equality kind of example, right? It was equitable to have that curb, but in some sense, you'll think about it like, okay, but it created an equal outcome for everybody, right? Everybody could be successful. So I think how you word that is important. If you want to use equality, I don't think it's a problem. It's just how you word it. So maybe you let me go back to your statement. Maybe you say, something around, let me go to your top one. Let me move this box around so I can see it. So the word like equal outcomes, I don't know if I have that in yours. Let me see. Sometimes we've used that. Student groups by creating policy and practice that. Yeah. That create equal outcomes for all students. I mean, that's the only way I could see the word, not only way, but that's a way you could use the word, is equal outcomes. So everybody gets to see over the fence, right?
so what you're basically trying to say is that every child should be able, we should have the program or the system or whatever you're calling the word for every child to be successful. Was that it? Am I saying it the wrong way or what? In other words, we need to make sure that every child will succeed, and we need to give them the tools they need to succeed equally so that every child will be successful. But I'm just saying it broadly like this, trying to find the words to say it.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure that what we're trying to say is really doing what we want it to do.
Right. Well, you have the word success in the first paragraph. So you talk about students, every student having available pathways to success. And so I think that is very broad, which I think is fine because success for one kid could be different for another. And so I think you have that word there. I think the 3 bullet points, remember that contextually is about you saying what it looks like in action. So that's almost like the mission part of this, right? So the vision is like pathway to success for all kids, right? Like that's kind of your big picture vision. But then when you go into what does this look like? Okay, maybe it is, and the word fair may not be it, but it's about really calling out, like, is this where you're calling out how to support the needs of those who need it the most, which is kind of going back to the article conversation. So maybe the word fair isn't it? I don't know. Bernie, what do you think?
I'm wondering if maybe the word support
Yeah.
could be in there, like policies and practices that support all students.
Exactly. That's what I was trying to say.
That support all students. Okay.
Yeah.
I think with that first bullet, it will be a question once we start getting feedback and asking for input. People may want to know, what do we imagine are some systems that have harmed underserved students?
Yeah.
And they'll say, well, what are you talking about? Like,
Yeah.
what is it?
Yeah.
So I think we have to be clear about that, to say it's X, it's Y, it's Z. It could be,
Absolutely.
W.
Yep. And it should show up. So kind of going back to this piece is those are the things that, let me go back to this slide here. These are the things you're calling out that show up in your data, right? So when people ask, well, what kind of, system issues are there? Where it's not just one, right? It's specific to data, it's specific to certain kids. So I think that's where you do have that opportunity to call that out, but we don't narrow the focus so much that we can't, say like there's multiple issues in the system. So when you go back to that bullet point, I don't know, Bernie, do you feel like we need to call it out a little bit more, or do you feel like we've called it out enough to talk about? We're calling out those that have been harmed.
I just feel like and maybe even board members have to have a couple of examples up our sleeve.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, some talking points. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, here's one example. One example that off the top of my head is, we've are trying to reduce the overrepresentation of our Hispanic Latino
Yeah.
students
There you
in
go.
special education.
Yep.
So their policies and practices, and particularly around how we teach English and how we support our English learners, that may have wrongly identified them or led them to be identified as special
Right.
education.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's maybe not a harm. I mean, in some ways they get some services, but for some, it could be a harm if they can't get out of that,
Right.
and they stay special education for what, even if they don't have a specific learning disability.
Absolutely.
So I
That's
think,
a good point.
so, I mean, so that's just one example for me
Yep.
of how we're trying to interrupt that
Right.
practice and change our structures and change
Absolutely.
our ways and be more supportive of English learners. So
That's
that
right.
many of whom
Love it.
are Hispanic, Latino,
Yeah.
that when we don't support them, end up looking like they have some special needs.
Yeah.
If they don't, all they are English, are learning. English.
Absolutely. And Bernie, I love that you said that because it made me think about the third bullet point, right? Which is calling out another piece of that is like the why, like if you said, well, here's an example of data. We have our Latino students who have been over-identified in special education, right? And someone says, why? Well, there's a why in terms of one, how we see student success, which I think is the second bullet. But the third is like, there's bias, right? There's clear bias. And without the right way of calling that out and calling out those equitable practices, then we won't interrupt the system, right? Because it is systemic, right? That data you just shared is not like just this last year, right? Like this is trend data that's shown up for years. So I love that you just said that this is where we have to have some clear examples and also I think
And
clearly calling that out.
the positive is it wasn't last year. So
Right.
that the fact that we started to dismantle or take apart some
Yes.
practices
That's
reversed outcomes. So
Good point.
last year we did not over-identify our Latinx students for special education.
Mhm, mhm.
We significantly reduced that over-identification because we
love
paid
it.
attention. So that's an example of a success.
Absolutely.
The other ones are the overrepresentation or over like suspensions for boys over girls, suspensions for African American and over Asian, that revolve around the third bullet. But sometimes we may suspend someone because the final act that they committed, let's just be, they threw a brick through the window. I think we all agree that that is a suspendable offense, right? None of us would say we should not suspend somebody or we should not. What we don't look at is what are the 20 things that happened before a student got so upset, so disturbed that they picked up the brick and threw it through the window. That's where, if we can begin to look at, Johnny, sit down, Johnny, stop talking, Johnny, pull out your book, the 20th time Johnny hears his name out loud.
Yeah.
It throws him over the edge,
Absolutely.
maybe enough to throw the brick through the window.
Yeah.
So yeah, Johnny threw the brick through the window and he needs discipline for that.
Yeah.
But Johnny was
Love
pushed
it.
to the edge and over the edge by smaller things that
Absolutely.
that the adults in the classroom had full control over and could have.
Love it.
So that it doesn't get him to the point where he loses control.
Yeah. And Bernie, what I love about that example, and I think helping your board kind of see like this is the stuff that happens in classrooms, right? That may not, the brick throwing may show up at the board level because it's like, oh, you're getting suspended, maybe an expulsion. I mean, depending on how bad these acts are, right? But the little nudges along the way that build up to that, like you mentioned, and then go back to your statement. As I was hearing you, I see all three of those bullet points. There's some intentionality with calling that out, right? That's a system issue. There's a rethinking student success, which is what I love around like seeing the strengths, right? The assets in a kid versus always seeing like the deficit and looking at, not looking at the just academics, but looking at the social, emotional space, right? Because that ultimately the impact of I look at it as stereotype threat, right? The more you kind of say that I'm not good, or I'm bad at something, eventually it manifests itself. And that's an inequitable practice that we have in our education field, right? That unfortunately go back to bias. Bias are blind spots. So what happens is those blind spots then create inequitable practices and we don't even know what's happening. So I love that your equity statement calls out like all of it, and you don't have it so narrow that you can't apply it to everything, right? But then ultimately you do have some things where I see you calling out specifics. And you know, Bernie, as you're mentioning a few of these, I can see you're calling out some of the equity gaps. And this is where we talk a little bit at the end about your next steps and how you can leverage, you know, either a soup council or an equity task force, but having a group that's going to literally sit down and roll their sleeves up and do a whole root cause analysis and come up with a real great input on your strategic plan around how are we going to close these equity gaps specific to, you mentioned our African-American students, our boys, our Latino students around, there was suspensions and also overrepresentation in special ed. Those are equity gaps that specifically this work is about, but it's going to require a plan, right? And it's bigger than just let's have a statement. And it's even bigger than just our policy. It's about, okay, how are we going to create a game plan? And so that's the longer term work that doesn't happen overnight. And it doesn't happen just with the board. That's when you'll have, you know, kind of, I call it an equity task force, or maybe it's a superintendent council, but it's a group of stakeholders who come together and help unpack some of these key issues that your statement is really applying to, but specific to equity gaps that show up in the data, those examples. So really helpful. So any other thoughts around your statement? I'm taking notes, by the way, and I'm making adjustments, and I'll reshare the screen in a moment, but I just want to make sure you can kind of take a look at some of the changes. One of my questions is, you all wanted it to be simplified. Do you feel like it's simplified enough that students and community members and maybe parents can look at it and go, I know what that means, like they get it? Or is it too jargony? Is it too, you know how we are as educators, we like to use big words, right? What do you think?
I don't think so. I think it's very consumable verbiage. Because like something like in the first bullet point, like harmed, we could say disadvantaged. So, you know, I don't think it's too academic.
Okay.
I'll second that. I agree. I think we've simplified it to the point where I think we should all understand it. But I will say, I feel that I bet you there's a chance that when we show it to other people, not just us here, that I'm sure there had to be more tweaking just to like make it even more digestible. Yeah. I'm sure there's like probably some phrases here that we think it's easy, but I think everybody else doesn't really know what that means. Yeah. So we might have to like tweak something.
Yeah, I mean, one test I use to identify jargony speech is I run it through Google Translate into Spanish, and then I read it in Spanish. I'm like, oh, that is not what we meant at all. So how do we write it in English so that when it translates to another language, it makes sense? It carries.
That's a good one.
So. And we will have to, you know, when we bring this to our PIAC group or our DLAC group, which we'll want to do, how do we have this available in some of the more significant languages so that they can provide input?
Yeah. What was your group? You said the PIAC. Tell me that acronym.
Essentially, it stands for Parent Involvement Advisory Committee, but it serves as our district parent advisory committee.
Got it. Okay, so like your dad.
Broadly, like we have 2 or 3 parents from every school are invited to come. We're happy if 1 parent from every school shows up.
All right.
If 1 parent from half the school shows up.
Got it. Okay.
But you know, Clayton has been a board representative to that committee, and he's attended, and he knows the parents who come to that. But they're a good stakeholder group to you know, even if it's 5 parents, I think they provide a good filter.
Yeah. One oh, go ahead, jump in. Sorry.
I was gonna say I agree. I think the PIAC is a good filter to understand if this makes sense or not. and like the nice thing is that they will gladly say what they think.
Mhm.
So you'll get actually like honest opinions about like if this makes sense or it doesn't make sense at all.
Okay. Yeah. And then I figure you have some student groups, you probably can run it by some of your leadership groups, maybe your 4th, 5th graders. You know, a lot of times that group, like when you think about the age, like I would ask kindergartners, but also think about like the kids who really give you some candid, you know, they have the maturity in their language to really give you some feedback. Your kindergartners and younger kids, it's always good to hear their voices too, because they're going to give it in a different way. They're going to talk about, like sometimes I'll ask younger kids, like, give me an example of what equity actually means to you. And they'll give like the play yard examples, right? And kids not sharing and being chosen to play in a game. They're not going to give you the extensive, you know, oh, I had a microaggression where a kid said something about my hair, right? They're not going to talk about that, right? But they'll give really good examples. So I think it's important to hear all students from kind of start to finish. And then also look at maybe surveys. So that's another way to use, like, you know, however you do your parent surveys. Sometimes it's great to ask them what it means, but then you can actually put your draft in there and say, you know, as a draft statement, just want to get feedback. And maybe that's just sitting on your website and you have it open for a couple of months. I don't know. But you know, all your normal platforms where you bring people together, your LCAP forum. So that's another one, which I know has been an interesting dynamic this last year, but those are all great spaces to get more feedback. So another thing I want to ask you, do you feel like you can measure this statement with data? So when I say, you know, 3 years from now, can I measure that you have examined biases to support facilitation of equitable practices? Like, is that something I can measure in data? Like, how do I know that that examination has happened? What do you think? I'm giving an example, but can I measure your equity statement with data, not just feelings? Because feelings matter, by the way. They do matter. Qualitative experiences matter. But with hard data, quantitative data, can I measure your statement? Are there some data points you could pull out to say, yes, we're closing that gap, we're addressing that gap, we're measuring the impact of our work? What do you think?
I think it goes back to identifying and getting examples of the first bullet. If we can draw out the points where past practices, past, you know, current systems have harmed or disadvantaged some student groups, then we can get the data on that to see, and then we can measure how we've approached that and how we've reversed or not those outcomes. And I think sort of the second and the third bullet are sort of the hows. You know, the first one is the what.
Yeah.
What has been harming, and then how do we reverse that harm?
Yeah.
We reimagine success, we examine personal biases.
Yeah.
To reverse that.
Right.
Change that.
And Bernie, this is interesting you mentioned about this other bullets. You're right. It's kind of more of the messier how work, right? But I always say, can we measure like that concept of reimagined student success? And you call it out through recognizing their unique gifts, talents, and interests. Can we measure that? And I think that goes to when we talk about like our grading system, our homework policies, right? Like, how do we measure student success? Is it only the traditional metrics in education, or do we have other ways that we measure the brilliance of kids, what I call it? And so I think that part we can, you know, we actually can measure because it's not always about like the stuff that shows up on the data dashboard, right? The things we collect year after year, but what about those incremental ways we measure student success? You know, I'll often give this one example I stole from a candidate. I was doing a superintendent search, and a candidate was in an interview, and it was a great analogy around data. And they use this analogy about a baseball card, and thinking about our kids, like if you imagine like a baseball card, there's like this beautiful, you know, person on the front, right? Their beautiful face and their beautiful name, and then you flip it over, and what do you see on the other side? like you see there, stats, right? So when we think about student success, what's your traditional stats we have right now? It's their SBAC score, right? It's their free and reduced lunch. Like, you know, the data, right? You know all the stats about kids, but there's some things missing, right? So things like, do we have metrics around what kids are really good at? So, like, do we know what they're interested in? Do we know where they've been successful, whether it's in school or out of school? Because remember, when we have that whole story of a child, which is qualitative and quantitative in many ways, we have a whole story. And now we talk about success. Like, how do we measure that to say, like, oh, I may have not passed the fluency benchmark that you have, so I never made honor roll. I mean, I'm just telling you a true story of one of our children who we just took to school, her college visit. That was our daughter, right? She rarely made the honor roll until high school, where they finally figured out ways to engage with her. But she was the one that never read as fast, but she comprehended really well. Super analytical, great kid to have in class, but she was always the bubble kid. So how do we measure her success? And we missed it, right? And so what happens is, over time, you create that story that you're not successful in school. You're not successful. Now, what does that do when it's time to take the big test? What does that do when it's time to read? And it's, you know, my teacher is testing me in fluency and I'm trying to get there because they got the stopwatch figuring out how many words I can read per minute. Like, who said that was success in school? So my point is, like, the second bullet, can you actually measure that? Yes, but that's the harder work, is a mindset. Because remember, when we talk about our educators who are in the trenches, our teachers, they have been given a structure of how to measure success of kids in traditional ways. So how do we reimagine that? That's where we have to look at, do we measure different metrics? And I think we're moving to that. I would agree. Would you all agree? Like, I think the LCFF and kind of LCAP kind of continuous improvement, accountability model, I think it's moved us to having multiple metrics, but we still often measure success based on the traditional things. And so when we talk about unique gifts, talents, interests, and social emotional growth, like, do we give that John? I think, Bernie, you mentioned the Johnny, the kid who threw the brick through the window, right? Like, do we measure when Johnny had a phenomenal day? And, like, does that show up on his report card, right? Or does that show up as he gets an award and he's on the honor roll too, even though he may have not had the academic success, but that we celebrate his success as well, knowing that maybe he'll flourish 2 years from now, even though our benchmark is now, right? So that's what I'm thinking about. When can you measure this? And I would like to say, yes, you can. It's just the struggle is the how. Bernie, you said it, like, how we do this is a little bit different. And it's going to require us to rethink what those metrics look like. And your grading system would be the one that shows up here a lot of times, because that's where often you measure kids' success in those report cards, especially in elementary, where you have a lot of different, like, ways we measure, right? You break down all the components. High schools, middle school, a little bit different, right? It's like a letter grade for one subject, right? But when you start looking at those metrics on the report cards, these are ways we can rethink it. And it can show up in data.
Yeah,
So hopefully it helps.
I mean, I'm thinking of, we do an annual survey with students and staff, and you know, and I think a good question there is, you know, for staff to say, I can identify the strengths of all my students, you know, 50% of the time, 75% of the time, 100%, 25%, you know, and then ask the students is like, one of my teachers knows about what I'm really good at.
I love it.
There you go.
See, you know, for students, it's more important that the students know, the teachers know, than it is for the teachers to say. But I think
absolutely.
But asking the question to teachers makes it a point of measurement. It's like, okay, I really have to know, like, I can identify a strength for half my kids, but the other half I can't. So I need to work on that. I need to figure out what their strengths are, what they're really good at.
Yeah. And you know, Nicole, with this conversation, and Bernie, you said some things that were going around in my mind. We know what the end result is. We want to be able to measure it. But now let's start peeling away. Go back to the beginning. Is it the expectation of the teachers, the principals, to collect this information? We can't assume that everyone's collecting this data. So this is when board members will ask the question, well, what process do you have in place that will be able to measure their unique talents. And then, you may have groups of certain teachers who automatically do it because that's just how they teach. But is it expected of everyone? Has that ever been told to all of them that this is the way we're going to do it? So that's where you have to we have to be careful not to assume that it's happening. Well, you have to know that that is very intentional across the board. And so that board members can pose the question on what process do we have in place? So that this conversation really made me think about this is where we want to be, but let's peel it all the way back to make sure this is where we're being very intentional. Going back to when Andrea was talking about the GI Bill, yep, we put something in place, but did we really make sure that it was touching everyone that needed to be touched in this regard? And so it makes me think about when, many, many years ago, when I would get those report cards that had all these columns, and it was saying a percentage of your strength is this. The teacher, they did know what I was pretty good at. Yes, she was a good reader, 25 or whatever percent. And so do we still do those things? It looks differently, but the key thing is, do we still have something in place to capture that information? Because if you have your equity statement saying that you're going to focus on their unique talents, again, who says what's the evidence? And so this is just listen to the conversation just made me think about this is where we have to be very intentional, that it's good to do it, but we have to make sure everybody understands that this is the way we do it, because this is the equity work. I just wanted to add that.
I remember at the end of elementary, at the end of middle, and at the very beginning of high school, taking some sort of career assessment test that evaluated where my talents sat, where my interests sat, and the possible career pathways that I would be successful at. So I think we need to systematize a SWOT analysis and an interest assessment on possible career paths, talents, gifts, skills, and then create policies and programming that actually develop and enhance those interests. So that's a way to measure it.
Spot on.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Mabel, for those of us who've forgotten what SWOT analysis is, can you remind us?
It's your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So the strengths and weaknesses are internal, and the opportunities and threats are external.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and these are all, like what Deborah said, is, kind of pulling it to the governance space, because what we see, like, you have a superintendent in the space, so he has obviously the expertise as educator to think about how this looks in the implementation. But what Deborah shared too is, like, what are those questions that you ask as a board? What is that data you need to see that you can measure the impact of your statement? So I love the discussion, because I think you all have a lot of different things that you can utilize to really put this into action. But what I want to do is I want to pull you back for a minute, and as you think about, finalizing your statement. I stopped sharing because I think it froze on us. I want to take a moment. It just froze on me again. Give me 1 second. Let's see. I want to get out of this and get into your. There it is. Okay. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to reshare the kind of final look at what your statement can look like, and see if you all feel comfortable with kind of using this as a quote unquote draft that you'd be willing to share with your stakeholders and start to give feedback. So can you see that okay, or is it showing off?
Not yet.
No.
Just a black screen right now.
Are you gonna? Okay. Yeah, it's doing one of its it may kick me out, so let me reshare.
I think she froze.
Reboot me. Sorry about that. Let me try that one more time. Let's see if this works. Sometimes Zoom just kicks me out, and I found out it does that to a lot of people. So it's not just me anymore. I thought it was just me, and it was a conspiracy. Okay, so what I did is I just was taking, so this document here is actually the document you have. So this is just the evolution of your statement. So you all have this. So as of today, what I did is just took some notes, but here's kind of where I want to see if you think this is the statement that really kind of resonates with you. Let me just blow it up so you can see it. That's not what I meant to do. So you can see it. Okay, there we go. All right, so take a look and tell me what you think about this being a potential, I call it final draft, that you can take and start getting feedback from your stakeholders. Uh-oh, I think
I
have
think
a
that first
typo.
bullet is missing some word.
Yeah, it is. Sorry, I think I accidentally, shoot, I think I took it out. Let me go back to the old one. Sorry. System that have harm. Sorry, the words I deleted have harm. There it is. Sorry about that. I deleted it on accident. And I think even the word by. I don't know if you all like this.
Yeah.
Through.
Through implementing or developing or through, well, was there a verb?
No, there wasn't actually.
I thought there was a word called creating, through creating policies, or am I?
Let me see. Let me go back to your
Implementing?
old one. System that have harm.
Student groups by.
Yeah, it's creating. It's
Creating.
creating. It's creating. Thank you, Maybell. I think I when I did a copy and paste on here, I think I just totally like deleted a sentence. But now I'm looking at it. I think it's all.
True.
Yep, there we go.
Yeah, erased all our hard work. No, just kidding.
I know. Well, the good news is because I'm a human being. I made sure I kept it. It's all up here. There it is, right? So you can see exactly what you all did. Yeah, in my haste to copy and paste and share my screen, I think I just missed that one. All right, there we go. But yeah, what do you all think? You feel like we're capturing it? You feel comfortable before we go into our policy piece of our work for our last half of our evening? What do you think? So I see Clayton's like, yeah. Marie, what do you think? You think this is a start?
It's a start. I think it says a lot of words that isn't really meaning what it says, but I think I know what you want to say.
Okay.
That makes sense?
It does. I think, and hearing more feedback, I'm sure that you'll massage this more beyond today. Like we're getting you started with, let's go out and ask people, but this is after 3 study sessions of you all looking through this. And you may say, you know what, after listening to our stakeholders, we want to start over and have something totally different. Like, it's okay. But we wanted you to have a process to begin to own what equity means to you, because you are the visionaries of this work.
I just think that the words are talking about things, but not getting to the real message.
Right. Yeah. And that, Marie,
Okay.
makes sense.
Intentionally interrupting systems.
Yep.
Get that language out. Just go to what we want to do. We want to create policies, practices that support all students.
Right.
It doesn't matter about underserved students or overserved students. All students.
Got it.
All students.
Got it.
That's all I'm saying is, the more I read this, it gets so like, what the heck?
Got it. Got it.
Okay.
When I think Marie is saying all of the above, I think that's what's interesting.
Yeah.
I think you're capturing everything. And so being intentional and calling things out, I think, is important, but also it needs to be broad enough where you're not putting yourself in too narrow of a space either. So I think that you all have a little bit of both. Because Marie, think of it like this. You're a governance team, right? So this applies to governance and policy, but like, does this apply to our teachers? Does it apply to our parents? Does it apply to our community members? That's, I think, where you'll have to wrestle with, is this applicable to everything in our school district versus just one group of kids or even one particular policy our practice. And so
That's why, yeah,
Mhm,
it's
mhm.
to support all students.
Yep.
Doesn't matter what issues or backgrounds or whatever it is that,
Oh, I see what you're saying.
I'm just saying is
got it.
I look
Yeah.
at, we support all students,
Right.
period.
Well, here's the trick. If we said that, then we'd be doing the equality thing. Kind of goes back to that. So without this piece here, without you calling that out, then what we're not doing is being intentional about what is really the issue. You got to call out that our system of serving all kids, we got to talk about what that means, because all kids don't get what they need. And you do have to be very, very intentional about explicitly the data is calling out certain groups of kids have been underserved. And if you're not clear about it, then what'll happen is you won't ever get to the root of the problem. Does that
Okay.
make sense? So I think I hear what you're saying, and you're right. The outcome is all kids, absolutely. Like, it shouldn't matter who kids are, but unfortunately, based on the history of public education, it does matter who they are. And we do got to call it out, because if not, it will never get addressed. And so that's why I love your statement where you're calling out like examining biases, because the biases is where kids are underserved, right? Why is it that some kids don't get services that others do? Well, that's bias, right? And that's historical bias. And kind of going back to your article, right? There's a reason why certain people weren't served as well as others, and you're all calling it out. That's the essence of equity work. So I think what you're saying, I get it. I'm not disagreeing,
Yeah.
but I think
Okay.
without calling it out, it's kind of like, you'll just kind of, it'll be too general, and you won't really get to the root of the issue. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, but I think we're all saying the same thing. So I
Okay.
definitely agree.
Okay.
Yeah, Bernie, what about you? Do you feel like this captures, a kind of a starting point that you can feel comfortable going out and getting feedback on?
I think so. I mean, I think I'd be curious specifically from the board, like what questions would you like posed to different stakeholder groups? Like, I can think of some, like, is this understandable? Is this clear? How can it be made clearer? Sort of taking each sentence one at a time, asking questions like that.
Got it.
I can think of, can you identify some systems that might have been harmful to some students? How do we change that? How do we identify students? Like, I can think of some questions that we can get feedback from, and just for the board to know, I have assembled a group of principals to support our work in equity. I'm calling them right now, for lack of a better word, sort of an equity steering group. It's not the task force, it's not very broad yet, it's just principals, but it will get broader. So they will help support, getting at least to the first level of getting this out all to staff.
Perfect.
Getting feedback from staff, and maybe even some parent groups at the school site. And we would replicate that again at a district level. But if there's particular questions that we want to seek answers to or feedback on, that would help me.
Got it. Now, any governance team members have any feedback on that? Is there particular questions that you want to hear in terms of feedback for your statement? I think that's an interesting question that Bernie proposes. Is this like, does this, what was the word you used? And I had it in my note. Let me go back to it. When we're talking about simplifying it, so does it actually, is it simple enough?
Is it clear?
Is it clear enough? Yeah. Yep.
Is it understandable? Clear? Is it clear?
Yeah. Is it clear? Yeah.
I would say, to follow up on what Superintendent said, I was going to say, like, does it keep us accountable enough? Because I feel like sometimes, like, it's like, like, there's like a lot of, like, even beyond school boards, organizations that create sort of like statements in general. But like, is there a way you can say that, well, it's not just for show, rather it's something? I don't know if there's a good way to ask a stakeholder that question. Just more of just like, does this actually, would you like believe this would do more than just create the mirror?
That's a great point, Claire.
Great question.
I think especially in this area, I mean, in this particular space of work, it's just so easy to do the hashtag or do the, it's how do we get beyond the hashtag, beyond the Facebook banner, you know, how do we get beyond our district has an equity statement? Like,
Mhm.
what does it really mean? And you know, my observations in the last 6 months is that many districts have the hashtag or have the banner, but the districts that have started to consider accountability measures and what does it look like and how do we have to change, are the ones experiencing some of that pushback that Deborah and Nicole have warned about, or not warned, just, you know, made us aware of.
Right.
That when, if it can stay high and not really applicable or not really,
Mhm.
doesn't really impact anything, we can get
Mhm.
a lot of nods, yeses. But
Right.
if it begins to change of, you know, I believe for the better, if it begins to change what we do and how we do it, that's where we get some, we will get some definite some, I'm gonna say pushback, but that's just looking at it from the negative. I think it's gonna be more questioning of what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Mhm. Mhm.
That would just be the positive way to look at
Yeah.
that.
Got it.
I
Okay.
think, sorry, Nicole. I think
Go ahead.
to answer Clayton's question about how are we being held accountable for this is to make it smart with something that's time bound. So we're examining biases, right? Okay, and then, you know, so I think that, you know, and this is just an example, I'm not saying this is what it should be, but like annually we examine the biases to continue to facilitate better practices, right? Or not just how, but how often are we doing this? And
Right.
um, I like Bernie's response to getting, you know, community involvement with asking questions like that and not really opening the floodgates to, you know, what other verbiage do you want to add? Because I think
Right.
that
That's right.
will
Good
elongate the
point.
process and kind of take away from what we're doing already.
Absolutely. No, I totally agree. Yeah, because you'd be, I call it waffling. You'd waffle like for a year, right? And coming up with an adoption. And it's okay. Like it's okay to take time. Deborah and I often say, like, don't rush this process, right? It may take you a year to do the final adoption because you all took several months to do your own work, right? You want to get feedback, but eventually you don't want to go back to square one where it's like, okay, we're wordsmithing and fighting with one parent because they're like, you didn't spell this word right. That is not the essence of it. It's really about discussion. It's about those questions you just said, is like, is this something we can measure? Is this something that, you know, we can see these examples of inequities? Those are key questions that definitely you can think about asking, and they can show up in not just, like I said, a dialogue with your input, you know, from your stakeholders, but also like in a survey. So you always want to ask questions that you can ask 2 and 3 years from now, by the way, right? So you want to ask things that can get you really good trend data around input. And keep in mind, Maybelle, you made a good point, which is kind of our segue to the policies. You mentioned the time-bound piece. So remember, the equity statement is more like a vision, kind of mission, like big picture, right? Your policy is going to be more detailed. And then that steering committee, which may evolve, as Bernie said, into kind of an equity, you know, action planning or task force, you name it, steering committee, that's where they really go into the plan. Right? Because remember, the plan is more implementation, which the board doesn't do. I think the board has the policy, which is where you all can call out your ways of measuring the impact of your policy. And this statement is in your policy. So I think that's the other piece that you've already kind of done, is that you've revised your policy already because you've already adopted the CSBA version of the policy. You just want to evolve it. And that's what we're going to do in this next last part of your session. So I want to ask just in general, Andrea, I know we didn't get a nod from you, but it sounds like everybody seems to be okay with this being like the draft that we get input from. Bernie is, you know, contemplating what questions we want to ask people to really get input. But do you feel like this is kind of a good starting point when you start to think about getting input from the stakeholders?
Absolutely. I agree with
Okay.
all of my board members. I think to answer your question, Bernie, I do think in terms of, I don't know about a question specifically at this time, but I am thinking that we need to incorporate obviously our teachers in this, because I know it was mentioned earlier. You know, obviously we are here for our students. However, our district is you know, it consists of so many more people, and in order for our students to be successful, obviously examining this teacher's biases or administration's biases or staff's biases, yes, but making sure that that is glued into all of this, because without those stakeholders, our students won't be successful. So it's kind of a mix of all of that, and so just ensuring that we're thinking about that as well.
Mhm. Got it. All right. And Bernie, in the notes, I'll make sure you have this actually in there. You all have access to it, but I'll make sure I reshare this. There's a couple of key questions you actually can ask, and just do something very general around just getting feedback, right? Just what do you think of our statement, and not really go too deep, but more about what do they think equity is? What is an example of an inequity, right? And then also, where is an example of equity in our district? So that's going back to measuring this, like, have these things actually happen? And I want to say, yes, I think Marie said it. We've done some really great things. And Bernie said we've been doing this. So asking people that, and then just asking them to give input on this statement, you know, it could be simple, very broad. I wouldn't ask them to go into wordsmithing it for you, but I'll share those notes with you. And it's like maybe 4 questions. You don't want to have too many, right? Because the more you give them, it's just too much. And it can be asked to kids, parents, you name it. Like, I think that's important too, that you can ask these same questions to anybody and it be consistent. And it can show up either verbally or in a survey.
Yeah, and I think the you know, there's different questions that we want to ask verbally in groups, because that's when you can get into more nuance. I have found that surveys sort of need to be closed versus open in terms of response.
Right.
There's nothing worse than trying to compile 100 responses and they're all different. It's like,
wait, you don't have a research, you don't have a researcher that you've hired in your district to do
that
all
can
that?
code, that can code the
That can
responses.
code it,
We don't know. No, we don't have that. That's me.
Most districts don't, so
That would be me.
that would be you. I
That would
know.
be
I
me.
know. No, it's all good.
Sometimes I feel bad that I asked the open-ended question, because like I can look at it and get the gestalt, but I cannot get to the you know.
Yeah, it's a hard one.
Yeah,
I do think a small group, you can get that when you can have the conversation.
Right.
You know, and the key thing before we move on is you guys have been going through this for months. And so again, you have to be careful when you put it out there so that they don't think that they're rewriting it for you. Like, no, we this is our rationale. We're going to front load. We're going to kind of give you a statement on the what we've been doing, and this is what we've come up with. Now we want your feedback on it, because you guys have taken the time to really go through it. And remember, the stakeholders that will be looking at it, they have not gone through this. And so, but it's a good thing because it's going to be fresh to them. So it could be, they could bring up something that you just didn't even think about. But, you know, when you're ready to put it out there, you know, I like those closed-ended questions. Here are the questions. This is where we want your focus to be there. Be very intentional about when you put it out there, what you're looking for. Because if not, you're going to, like, throwing the net out there. You're going to bring in so much stuff that you really didn't want to hear. Or didn't need to, but just making sure everybody stays focused. But it's all in the language on how you present it to them. But I think you're well on your way. This is a good start, though.
All right. Well, what I'm wondering is, do we want to take a little bit of a brain break, maybe 5 minutes, so you all can pause, and then we can come back. We have about an hour, and we're going to go through gesture policy, which again, you've already adopted. So that's the good news. You have one, but we need to go back and make sure it's yours. And apply your statement will just be a part of that. But do y'all want to do like a 5-minute brain break? Is that okay? Okay, so maybe I was like, yep. Okay, so maybe we'll come back. It looks like 6 minutes, so maybe 8:30. Is that all right? All right, cool.
We can just leave it, right?
Yeah, if you want to mute and mute your turn your video off. It's up to you, but yeah, usually on your breaks, you just mute and stop your video.
Stop video and mute, right?
Uh-huh. Yep. Yeah. Perfect. All right. Well, welcome back from your break. What we're going to do is transition and make a connection to your equity statement into your policy. And so what we're going to do is actually Deborah's going to kind of walk you through a dialogue about the current policy you have, but just want to do a quick connection to like the purpose of a policy as well as connecting it into like how you use a policy. So I'm just going to share one slide and then I'm going to pass the virtual mic back over to Deborah to get us started. And we're going to pull up your current policy. So again, congratulations, you already have one. But I want to make sure that we understand kind of the next step. So can you all see that okay? Perfect. All right, finally. Perfect. All right. So what you see, you see it okay, Deborah? Yeah? Okay. Okay, so what you're going to see, I'm going to pass the virtual mic back to Deborah, but just want to make sure I give you just quick context of why we're doing this piece and why it's so important when you're talking about your equity policy work. Is that one, it's not enough to have a policy. Okay, yes, every effective board has an equity policy who does this work, but it's really like, how do we use the policy, right? So what Deborah's going to walk you through is kind of two pieces. Is what are the components of an effective policy, right? That is a living, breathing document. And how do we kind of take that equity statement, that vision, and fuse it into that so it becomes like the lens by which we do everything? And then how are we going to actually use this policy where it doesn't just go sit on the shelf and become the toy you forget about? So I'm going to go ahead and leave it up, and then I'm going to pull up your a policy that you have in a moment. Hope I have the right version. So Deborah, I'm going to pass the virtual mic to you. All right.
Sure. Good. Well, here we go. So with, again, you guys have adopted the CSBA one, and then it sounds like you've had a chance to look at the other policies, which we can kind of talk about if there are pieces that you like. But the key thing is, just understanding what's important to be in there. And that's the key for when you have a template that you adopt, then you have to make it personalized because there are stuff in there that you have to put in that is very specific. So of course, your background, you're understanding the why you're doing this work and what your the reasoning for focusing on equity. It's almost like a statement, but it's just giving some information on it. It's just your data. How did you even get to this place of saying that you even needed an equity policy? And so really identify what the background of that is, and your vision and your purpose of the board. What your vision statement is almost like your equity statement. And Nicole had mentioned this before, where some boards have, if you looked at the other policies, they have really made that their vision, their mission statement, if you will, is what their equity statement is. But it's so important to say what is the purpose of what the board is supposed to do. It's really important to say what the purpose of, or the purpose of what the district is going to do. The superintendent, what the superintendent is supposed to do. So it is being very specific and intentional about with the vision and who's going to do what. And of course, your equity statement, we always tell you that is what drives your equity policy. That's why we just spend so much time really crafting it to make sure that it is a very good starting point to be able to now flush out what it looks like. And so that's why we didn't have to have too much detail in the statement, because the detail is going to be in the policy and how it's going to be implemented, where staff will be able to look at the policy and really see, oh, this is what is expected. This is what it looks like in the classroom. This is what I'm supposed to do, whatever, what the superintendent is supposed to do, the board and the district as a whole. Everyone will be able to see what their role is. And again, the superintendent, the direction, the guidance, the administrative regulations, all of these are components that fall into an equity policy. We shared with you on some sessions before, like 4 priorities, and you guys view those priorities, and whether you know, want those 4 buckets that we would say that are your priorities. They're not hot topics, but you definitely need to have your priorities, your goals, or where your focus is going to be that supports your equity statement. And so we had talked about the budget, human resources, teaching and learning, and school climate and safety. So whether you use that, you could start there and then just kind of pull out what area is very specific. And maybe you had mentioned something about monitoring, like every year. You were using it as an example. Actually, this is what should be in your policy. It should be an annual evaluation of it, where everyone is being held accountable, that it's monitored, and that it is measurable, because you may have to make some tweaks. And of course, we always have to make sure that it aligns with other policies too. You never want to have your equity policy contradict anything else, because it should go hand in hand with if you have bullying or any other type of suspension or anything of that nature. And so the practical application, you know, guides all your governance practice. Everything you do is going to guide you in your decisions that you're making, and the evaluation progress. Again, making sure that it's not just sitting there and not being looked at. It's a living document, really, even though it is a board policy. But this one is very active because it's woven through everything you do. It aligns with your LCAP and the work that's going to be done throughout the district. Board superintendent, more questions, and I always say this to you: what questions would you ask of your superintendent? So you have to continue to make sure that when the work is being done, what questions do you have? Your agenda building, you know, we always say that equity, of course, is not just on the agenda, it is the agenda. And so when you're building your agenda, will we be able to look at your agenda and know that you are an equity focused district? Your decision making, all of this is connected to through the lens of equity. This is all the work that we've been doing with you over these last sessions to make sure that that you can apply this. You've learned all this, now you have to just make sure that you apply it. And again, prioritizing the work, the areas that you're going to stay focused on, because there are going to be obstacles or distractions where people will say, well, this is equity, I want you to, you know, worry about this, but you have to just stay focused on whatever your goals are going to be, not, of course, the hot topics, but actually your priorities, your main goals. Reference as a recentering of the governance work, of course, when we would talk about the golden circle, always focusing on the why, what, and how, but especially your why you're doing this work. And this will go hand in hand, of course, with when you're monitoring, evaluating, are we still focused on the work that we're supposed to do? So this is just an overview. And as you looked at the CSBA's equity policy and the other ones, that hopefully you did pick up these components that were there. And of course, these are what we're saying should be in there, but if you wanted to add something else, that is okay as well. So did you have any questions about the overview of what goes in the policy? Now that we're getting ready to customize yours, now be very specific about putting the ingredients in this cake, if you will. So any questions on that? And so if not, where the conversation is going to be is when Nicole pulls up your policy that you adapted. And just as we go through this, and maybe you mentioned that like the Cincinnati one, that was longer and all that. So it sounds like you did have a chance to look at the policies. Looking at Elk Grove, though, to me, it looks like this is also the CSBA one. Is that correct, Nicole? I believe they adopt, because this looks as close to as possible to me.
I would say yes and no. I think they really I like theirs because they customize it for them. Really, really, you can see they put their fingerprint on it.
Yeah.
So I would say, yeah, Elk Grove is definitely their own. And I think this one has been in place prior to CSBA. I'd have to double check when CSBA put that into your, was it your gamut system? But yeah, they really made it their own in Elk Grove,
Yeah.
which is what I liked about it.
Okay.
But it definitely has some similar framework to it as well.
Mhm.
And just out of curiosity, for your board, when we talked last, you all have adopted the CSBA policy, so it's officially one you've adopted. That's correct. Yeah. So Bernie's like, yes. So
Okay.
I think one of the things we wanted to do, Deborah mentioned that there's some other samples you got a chance to look at. So like Cincinnati, I think Oakland is in here. You have Portland, Fort Worth. Have you all had a chance to take a look at any of those? Okay. And the reason why we bring it up is because although you have an equity statement, one of the ways that we like you to think about massaging it and really making it your own is to look at what are some other examples, right? So I think Maybelle, you'd mentioned earlier, like, you know, do we have too much or too little for equity statement? And it's like, no, it's about it being yours, right? So there's no right or wrong way, but I think they have some really good language in theirs that sometimes helps us to massage it. So would it be helpful to give you a couple moments just to go back to your samples to take a look before we go into unpacking yours? Let me stop sharing. Would that be helpful to give you a couple seconds to go back and look at a few? Okay. I saw a couple of nods, Deborah. So maybe we give, I don't know, maybe about 5 minutes. So you can just all go through, look at your own policy, but also look at some of those. And maybe there's some language that you may like about the policies that you saw that were examples. So that when we go through yours, as you go through each section by section, that you all have some language you may want to infuse. Okay.
Right. I think that's a good idea because we don't have to recreate the wheel. There is some good language out there, and then you just can wordsmith it.
Yeah. Bernie, I think you're on mute, my friend.
I am. I'll go ahead and pause the recording for 5 minutes.
Okay, sounds good. Okay. So as Deborah is walking you through your policy, I'm going to just pull yours up on the screen. And of course, did I find it? Did I find the rubber? There it is. All right. So I'm going to pull it up on the screen, and then I'm going to show you the Word version that we're going to wordsmith. And there's a couple of little notes that we have in there to kind of walk you through a little bit of some of the changes you may want to consider. Okay. Can you see that okay?
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. We're on a roll with Zoom now. All right. So this was the sample policy. And I say sample loosely because you've already adopted your policy, which looks just like this from what we understand. And so this particular policy, I'm going to pull up in a Word version, and we'll share and make some notations as you all are discussing your policy. Okay. Just so you know. And then what we'll do at the end is we'll be able to give you your draft revisions, and then you all can determine next steps on when you want to amend your policy. But this is the policy you see here. And some of the verbiage at the top is just more about ed code. And then what you'll notice is when we get down here to this piece, more of the policy itself, like what you believe diversity is, they give language for that in order to eradicate. That's the piece we'll start talking about where you may want to put your equity statement in. You'll have the board shall, so that's kind of the board policy itself. And then you have the board and superintendent shall, right? So now you kind of have the alignment with what you expect of the superintendent, and that's also where the admin regulations may come in. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. And then the last part of your policy is where you actually call out like ways that you actually measure the implementation of your policy. So that's the last piece. And what you'll see in the policy, you'll notice the components of a lot of policies. You'll see the CFs there, which are references to your current policies that have similar connections, implications. Okay, so just giving you a reference about your own policy, okay, is what I'm sharing on the screen. Okay, and you may notice at the bottom, just legal references. These are all kind of general things that people put in their policies, but you'll also notice that some of them may be things you all can add in that are specific to your own references. So like they put in the CSBA publications, there may be some documents you want to reference that you want to put in your own policy. That's all stuff that you can do on your own as you develop your policy. Okay. Just a quick question before we jump into this. Do you all have a policy committee? Are there two of you that are specifically working to look at policy?
We do have two board members that review policies
Perfect.
prior to adoption or
Perfect.
recommendation for adoption.
Perfect. So this will be really helpful, I think, process for you to do that, whichever ones you are appointed to those roles. And so, Deborah, I'm going to do this. I'm going to take this one off the screen. I'm going to pull up the other version. And I'm just going to share a couple of notes just based on how discussions have gone already that may help with you all evolving your policy. So let me make it a little bit bigger so you can see it. Let me see, how's that look?
Okay.
All right. All right, so this is just the Word version, and what you see, anything in red is just edits that we've begun to make just based on what you can consider, okay? So Deborah, I'll let you go and I'll just type.
Okay. And so, okay, are we going to start at the, let me see, where the further down, here, that's where the equity statement is. Replace it. So in order, a little bit further.
And go like this so you can see.
Make it a little bit bigger because, yeah, I'm squinting.
Okay,
but-
let me do that. So these, yeah, there you go.
So you took out in order to eradicate, Okay, the board shall. Yeah, can you go down a little bit?
So let's
And
just
so-
go up to the statement piece first, 'cause I think that component of this piece is where, so I put strike throughs here because this all seems like language that's identifying like the way they define equity.
Right.
So this is where I just inserted your equity draft statement of potentially replacing the language that's already in your policy so that it's not redundant.
Right. And so what you guys can see, do you agree with that replacement? Everyone's good with that?
Yeah.
Any of the language that's striked out, it's okay. I think you captured everything in your equity statement. We're in agreement with that?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, as a lot of people say this is just redundant or the language is just not the language you used.
You would use, yeah, in order to eradicate. I mean, there, you can always explain it more, have your own statement there, but I think if we clean this up and you don't have to have that. So your vision, the philosophy, and your goals, those are the other policies that it's referring to. Okay, is there anything here that you would like to add? Making any other statement prior, about your equity statement, or to actually start going into the other part of the policy? Any other statement you want to make?
Just to ask, I'm assuming that these changes would be after we decide on what the equity statement is, if there is changes. Am I correct?
Yeah. Yeah, because this is a draft equity policy, so we're not, yeah. But since we went through all of, we're hoping that, of course, you're not going to start all over with your equity statement, but I think you have enough information in there that the policy can now start flowing based upon what you said you're going, what equity is to your district.
Okay, cool. That works for me.
Yeah. But
And
again,
I think, Ms. Koo, I think you understand more as well as anybody else that sometimes we adopt the same policy several times in a year because the updates come to it. So, I mean, we could wait until we have our equity statement, what we want it to be, after input and stuff, or we could choose to adopt it and then re-adopt after it's been refined and worked on more fully. So that would be a decision of the board. We're, specifically, I'm just thinking of some policies that seem to come up 3 or 4 times a year. Like the complaint policy seems to be the one that comes up in every update packet. So
But in looking at the other policies, there was a heading about the guiding philosophy. So when you guys looked at the others, were there any other language that you did like from the other policies that you would like to put in here? Based upon the other policies that you looked at?
I'll go. I liked, I don't know, for some reason I gravitated toward the word culture. So I forget who it was. It probably was Cincinnati because I think I looked at that one the most. There was they talked about like a teaching and learning culture. And for some reason that was important to me, and being culturally relevant as well. So there's that. I also liked lifelong success, because that goes back to legacy and would probably even include multi-generational success. We kind of stand on the shoulders of the people that came before us, right? And so if it wasn't for, Rosa Parks, if it wasn't for Malcolm X, if it wasn't for, Vicky Manalo, the first, Filipino Olympic star or whatever, like if it wasn't for all these people, all of us wouldn't be here. So I think most of the policy needs to also speak to that, like a domino effect, because there's multi-generational privilege, right? What we talked about, that staggered start. So this is kind of like we're teaching the future generations to teach the future generations as well, right? It's that whole old adage, the each one teach one adage, right? So I think those spoke to me the most. I don't know, but I'd love to hear what other board members thought of the others as well.
And Maybell, real quick, which policy were you referring to, that sample language?
I'm pretty sure it was Cincinnati's.
Okay. So it's kind of like, okay. So in the beginning, more of
the Portland one did have quite a bit about culturally relevant pedagogies and strategies as well.
Got it. And so you're thinking more like in the beginning, like Deborah asked about, like putting that somewhere in here around like kind of your guiding philosophy, kind of putting that up here in lieu of this language I struck out. Is that kind of what I'm hearing? And here's why I say this: when you all go down to what the board and superintendent shall do, and you start looking at actions that you can measure, there is some language we could actually infuse in some of this, which actually may show up. And then where's the one I was thinking of? It's somewhere around, like this piece of where'd it go?
Number 5 right there.
Yeah, there it is. And that's where you put like the word cultural relevant, that kind of thing. So we could infuse language in this piece too. So I just want to make sure I don't miss that. Is that kind of what you're thinking, Maybell, when you brought that up, that it needs to be infused in throughout the policy, maybe not just at the beginning?
Possibly, yes.
Okay.
Anyone else, someone else, or your thoughts about, if you would like to add anything else according to even what maybe I'll share? Anything resonate with you from other policies, the language? Did you like the guiding philosophy to kind of start out, then what the board's guiding philosophy is?
So, you know, this goes back to what Maybell was talking about earlier, in the sense that there's just so much more in the other statements. I like how I think they explicitly, I know ours is very concise, but I think because they explicitly delve much deeper into kind of their action plans, which is what stood out for me. They were like, you know, we're going to create these timelines. And I think the one I'm talking about is Oakland, where they're like, this is the timeline and this is what it's going to achieve. Those are some of the things that I feel like will help with probably the conversations we're going to have with our community and stakeholders, because this is so concise that it's like, well, what about this? And how is it, back to, I think, the question you asked earlier, which is how can you measure this? I think with those timelines, putting it back to how it's going to help with these 3 bullet points, I just feel like we just need to elaborate a little bit more, maybe. I don't know. What do my other board members think?
I'm going to go down here because this may be helpful. What do you think, Deborah? I feel like they're going into this piece, which may be helpful, is go beyond the statement and look at like the actions, right? Like what you shall do. So let me go here. So the first part, I just took where it says the board shall, and I just took what you currently have and I just put in bullet points so you can actually see what it says. It's kind of, it was mushed into one paragraph and I don't do well with that. So I like the bullet point. So take a look at that and then we can go into the actions down here.
Actions.
Which I'm taking notes on where we can infuse some of that language. Yeah.
So I had a question. It seemed to me that some of the policies that we're looking at got into the weeds more than a policy should. And I don't know if the administrative regulations is where that goes, or a separate equity plan. You know, and I'm referencing particularly the Portland one, which it was 3 years after the equity policy was adopted that school board approved and adopted the equity plan. So there was a lot of time and energy and thought put into that plan about the action steps that they're going to put into place. So I think my understanding is, as far as policy goes, we need to stay up high by big goals and, you know, guiding principles, so that regardless of who's on the board or who's a superintendent, or, you know, that guides us. And then the plan is the more nitty gritty of how we get there.
Right. And that's why I think identifying what your, you know, we call it guiding and plans, or your priorities, so that you stay focused, big picture. And so to, you know, wanting to hear from you, what are your focus areas? Because the focus areas should be in your equity policy as well. You know, that's staying at the governance level, whether it's those 4 buckets that we've talked about before. And so what are your thoughts about these bullets, what the board shall?
Yeah, I think I forgot to bullet point 1.
Bullet point 1 seems...
Sorry, now there's 4. Sorry, Andrea.
No, go ahead.
There it is.
So I'm looking at bullet 1, and it's very specific to culture or some people of color. I don't know. I feel like based on what we've been talking about earlier, it might be too, like, it's not as, I don't know the word to use. It's not inclusive of everything.
Yep. Yeah. Do you feel like some boards have used like socioeconomic backgrounds in addition to like students with special needs? So this is where you did kind of call it out, even though you do want to say all kids, but this was about intentionality again, and to see a deliberate awareness of the impediment. So I think that was the piece. So this is where you may want to call out, what are those student groups that you're referring to? So students of color, diverse cultural linguistic, like, is this general enough? but specific enough.
I don't think it is. It doesn't call out, students with disabilities. It doesn't call out sexuality. I think it's not enough.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's why in some policies they have a list. They list everyone, as if we will not discriminate against gender, identity, socioeconomics, disability. They start listing everything. So the only area, doing that is what if you leave some group out? But
Right, and that's
that's the tough thing, because they can well, what about this group? What about this group? So how do you list it?
Can we add at the end, after we think of I would agree that, having the general categories, it's hard to be specific within those categories. But at the end, adding and other marginalized communities or marginalized student communities, because we don't know what will come up.
There's a good point.
10 years ago, we had very few Middle Eastern families, and now we have quite a few. 20-25% of our families are Middle Eastern.
Right.
So that's now becoming a student group that we can address as a group, because we have so many.
And you're right. Thanks for bringing that up, because when you're doing any policy, it should be sustainable. It's not just for today. You try to make it broad enough where you're not constantly having to update it all the time, but even though there will be tweaks. So that's a good.
So can we say any
the language?
Any other marginalized student communities instead of all?
Oh,
any,
because we've listed some. So any other?
Yeah, and I got to massage this because this sentence is not grammatically correct anymore. I'll massage it though. But yeah, we're calling it out. So I'll massage it when we give you your final draft.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what about the second bullet? Ensure that equity is the intentional result of district decisions. You're okay with that one?
Sorry, Deborah, I would actually also include religion, since Bernie brought up the Middle Eastern population and how much it's growing. I think that would be important to include, just to add another one, right?
Okay, and I'll fiddle with the language just so you all know, because it's not grammatically correct. Now, as you all,
one more actually, if you want to go that route, do you want to do sexual orientation?
Yeah, that's I felt like that was missing too.
Did I miss it? I put gender,
identity, sexual sexual
oh, sorry.
orientation.
Yeah, because you have to spell both of those out. Yeah.
Okay.
Students with special needs, socioeconomic backgrounds, and any other marginalized student communities.
And again, remember this part up here is, and Bernie said it really clear, like it's designed to be at the 30,000 foot level, right? As a board.
Ensuring that it's addressed, not doing it. You just want to make sure all the bases are covered.
Yeah, and so it's more about, because boards make decisions, you don't do the work. So this is really about like your decisions, you're intentional, that they address. And here's this other piece, which I believe this is the bullet point that probably needs to be massaged with this first bullet point. So I'll fiddle with it because I don't want you all to feel like you have to go in the weeds for that. But you see how you're calling out certain groups. So like the first bullet point and the third one kind of does the same. So I feel like those two can maybe be integrated. But this is the big piece, is considering whether your decisions. So this is again, it's an equity policy, and it's any decision you make, are you considering these things, right? And that you're calling out bias and stereotypical assumptions. This is going to be big when you look at your data. So that's the big picture for what the board shall do, right? But then when you go down to this last part, I don't know if you all want to jump into that for the sake of time to make sure you all can really look at, is it calling out the big things, your big priorities?
Kind of rely on the basis. I think that's a good start there, but yeah, to align with the board priorities. We have about 12 more minutes. Do you guys have the energy to just kind of add, look at what's here, and if anything is that you would want to add? Talked about the data. It's based on data disaggregated.
Oh, did I go high enough? Sorry, let me go up here. Sorry about
Right there, yeah.
that. There we go. And this part, I haven't touched any of it. So just so you all know, I just put a notation around aligning with your priorities. Obviously, Bernie just mentioned the admin regulations, and then timelines. And these are things that may be developed over time. You may not do that now, right? It's kind of just big picture, but you got to allow the policy to actually drive development of actions. And these are all actually pretty decent, what they've called that, what you already have. It's just being more specific about priorities. So you have assessing student needs here. So you have your funding, which is one of your priorities. Yeah. The HR.
Making sure they have access. They, encouraging students to enroll. So that's the climate. And then the curriculum.
Access one, yep.
Could we explicitly say equitable access in that?
You can. Let me see. Enabling, encouraging students to have access to enroll in. Like that, Maybell?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, it's okay. If it's not perfect, I can fiddle with it. I just need to notate what you're envisioning. Yeah.
Access to.
But this is that access conversation, right? So that's big.
We don't have advanced college preparation.
I was gonna say that one probably should come out.
Middle school, but we do try to prepare students to have access to advanced college preparation programs when they enter.
Right.
Well, I think, I don't want to go into the weeds here, but like I remember visiting, where did I go? FDR, and there was a STEM class, a coding class. We stumbled upon Bernie. I don't know if you remember this. This was a while ago.
Yeah.
And I asked Sean, the principal there, how come there's only boys in here? And he didn't even notice. He was like, I didn't even notice there were no females in this class. And I said, okay, this is, to me, that's an equitable issue. We should be promoting girls to take this course. So something like not only just extracurricular courses, but
maybe higher level. No, higher level.
They didn't have it before. Like they didn't have the access to it before. It wasn't specifically promoted to them.
Yep. I'm going to use this word. And again, we're trying to keep it broad because you don't want to call out, like you have so many that you may come up with that you want to maybe keep it broad. But I hear you, what you're saying, Maybell, is things that, and you called out, they didn't have access at all. I put higher level or advanced. I'm going to put, because you do have like GATE. You all still have GATE?
We don't.
No. Okay. So does that even sound right? Higher level or advanced courses that may not be.
And we don't have separate courses, but we aim to provide those opportunities in the heterogeneous classroom.
Okay.
So,
I'm going to say
advanced opportunities.
Yeah. Opportunities. Yep. Okay. Perfect. All right. You all are on a roll. Back there. Okay. Right.
Okay. Positive climate, promote student engagement.
And so just real quick, just kind of for those, the two of you doing the policy review, like this is where you have to talk about, okay, maybe this doesn't apply, right? Because
Mhm.
some of these things in here are not applicable, but this again is the sample CSBA gave. And this is why you want to go through, make it your own, because this may not apply based on.
Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I thought about that too, but I think the way that we phrased the statement above for higher level / advanced
Yeah.
opportunities, that the kinds of programs that we're trying to prepare students to be ready for are
Right.
IB programs and AP programs.
Yeah, absolutely. So then you'd all put your policy, because you all have policy around that. You just have to massage these. So yeah, absolutely.
This is where it's so tedious, where you literally have to go through like every line. It is. It's like, yeah, very tedious, but that's why, like you said, Bernie, it could take up a couple years, you know, for you by the time you wordsmith it and adopt it.
I'm gonna put this in while I'm thinking.
To look relevant. Yeah, because you want to focus on the curriculum, and that goes by what Maybell said about
Right. Mhm.
various among student groups.
And then I skipped 4, sorry, but 4, does that read okay? You all talked about like suspensions and kind of school climate. I also wonder about calling out special educate overrepresentation. Let's see where we can put that at.
Yeah, kind of representation, because that's
Probably
usually
number 9, don't you think?
yeah, conducting program evaluations there
Yep, there it is.
on equity and access for outcome with all students on all indicators.
And there's that would be like including minimizing overrepresentation of student groups in, you know, programs such as special education.
Mhm.
I'm gonna put something in there. Okay, yeah, I'm gonna I think I'm gonna put this in like a IE kind of thing. We'll see. I'm gonna fiddle with it, Bernie, because it's not the only thing, right? But it is calling that out, and that's a big one for y'all. So I'm gonna put it in parentheses, and then I want to put the suspension ones. I feel like that one might have been here.
Yeah, so we're discipline, yeah.
Okay, so language doesn't look good, but I'll fiddle with it. That was the other one you called, right, Bernie? Earlier.
Yes, yeah, that.
And this one was overrepresentation of Latino students. There we go.
Latino, yeah.
All right, cool.
Yeah. Being very, this is where you're connecting your equity statement into all of this. So
Yeah, love it. Love it. Yep.
being intentional. Yeah.
Ryan Clan. All right, so as we go into the last ones, the only last piece besides all the legal jargon, which you all don't need to go through, is this last one. This Maybell, this reminds me of what you said about the timeline. And I think Clayton, you mentioned accountability. So this is that statement about how you all will regularly monitor. And so this is where you may want to add in something around how you would do that, right? So obviously there's some big picture things like how you ask questions and the data that's presented to you, but Do you feel like there's other language that would be needed here, or just kind of leave it general, right? Like you calling yourself like you shall regularly monitor this policy and the decisions you make, which kind of goes back to the connecting to what the board shall do up here, which is about how you'll make decisions. That was this piece here. But this is after you call out some of your priorities and actions or activities. This is where you talk about how you'll actually monitor. And so I think the action plan, which is a separate process, it's going to take you time to develop a plan on how you'll implement all these. This is where you may find that the timeline and accountability metrics show up.
I think also there's an opportunity in the local control accountability plan, like the board regularly reviews progress on the LCAP, reviews writing of the new LCAP actions. So if we could just sort of be explicit that they'll utilize, that the board will utilize those reviews and LCAP reviews, and as well as updates to that that's the perfect time for these questions to come up. How support X, how do we ensure that students with, where do our students that have their gender identity and sexual orientation, how do we support them? Where does that show up? So
okay, I'll fiddle with that, but I love that. So we're gonna add that piece in.
And I think it's just helpful for me to think about, we do LCAP reviews and we do LCAP updates at least once every 6 to 8 weeks.
Okay.
So I think that's just a perfect opportunity for that to happen.
To monitor at the same time.
Yeah, to say, oh, we don't have any actions that address X, Y, or Z. So how do we make sure that we incorporate more actions in that area?
Got it. Okay. And Bernie, do you envision that through your kind of admin regulation process and also the equity, not equity, what was the word? You mentioned a steering committee. Do you feel like that may be another way to help utilize the progress monitoring for the board?
Yes, I think that the steering committee right now is mostly focused on how do we push this work that the board has done out into our schools. Engaged in similar process, similar activities. Eventually, I think that will grow into once the board, the equity statement and policy are defined and adopted, development of, and I would hesitate, to create a separate equity plan as Portland did, because we do have the LCAP. I just would like to make our LCAP be our equity plan.
That would be nice, Bernie. That would be really nice. I really appreciate you saying that. I think I've had that kind of struggle with districts to say, how can you take the plan you have and it drive your work? I think the problem is that, it's usually like 300 pages long.
Right.
And so what we say is like, take like a piece of your LCAP and that be your equity plan, because the plan is more about closing an equity gap. And the LCAP is about a lot of things, right? So I think it's calling out, like you had two you called out, is overrepresentation in special ed and also the suspensions. Maybe those are the two things that show up in your equity plan, that steering committee or task force, whatever group that is, that's the group that really is part of the plan. Because remember, the work is about closing gaps, right? And so I think while, your policy kind of speaks to all kids, it also speaks to like, we got to close gaps. And that's where the plan, I think, is really helpful. And it is kind of separate from the LCAP, but it should be a piece of the LCAP, right? It shouldn't be like it's some separate thing.
All the actions should be in our LCAP.
Absolutely. Yep.
They shouldn't exist outside of that.
Absolutely. So what I'm going to put a note here. I'm going to put equity action plan focused on key equity gaps or something like that. So I'll just leave it at that for now.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? And then and then you mentioned your admin regulations, which I'm just going to put I'll put it there as a reference, because I know that you as a superintendent also kind of have your kind of directives to staff and what you all are doing with your, so that I think needs to be referenced here in some way, shape, or form, because everything you all do should all be lined together. It shouldn't be like this is some separate document and separate.
I don't like doing 5 different things. I just
it should
I
all
want to
be
do
aligned.
I want to do one thing that has 5 focuses or something.
That's
There
right.
you
That's
go.
right. That's right.
That's being efficient, Bernie.
Got it. Okay, cool. All right.
Yeah. Well, this
Well,
is
it's
a
that
start.
time. It's that
Yeah.
time. And actually, they have to have quite a number of things that they've gotten to adjust. So,
Yeah. It's
So who
tedious work, but it's so worth it. you know.
yeah. So just out of curiosity, as we close out, who are the 2 that are kind of tasked with looking at policies? Clayton's like, okay, this is where it drops. The hammer drops, right? Clayton and
Manufo, who's not here
Manufo.
today. Yeah, but she'll
So
be.
we get to volunteer her for everything, right?
Yeah.
So just a quick note for like the next steps, like your policy obviously has already been adopted. So I think for that you have to just say, look, we have a policy, we can use it, we can apply it. It's not like it's something that's separate. But now that you see all the things in red, hopefully, Clayton, this may be helpful for you and Manufo to look at and go, okay, let's really unpack this. You may have to go through these CFs and make sure those are updated and accurate for your district. I think that's important. So what I'll do is I'm just going to put those in red just so you all can just take a look at those, because I think that's important. And then this is in the Google folder, Bernie, so you all should be able to access it still. So I did it in real time so you all could have it. And not and then you can massage it a little bit. I think you all like these, you have your account. Yeah, see, a lot of these are already
and as I was reading this,
applicable.
I don't think that the CSBA policy excludes anything that we've discussed. I think that the changes we've made have just made it more specific. So
I agree. Yeah.
So I don't think that we're like in danger because we have a
Yeah.
CSBA equity. Like we can do a lot under the CSBA equity policy. This just
Absolutely
makes it for us.
Yeah, and just making sure it aligns, because there's some things don't apply to your district and some things do. So that was the only thing that the policy I was just bringing up for Clayton and Manufo to be able to look at. So I'm just highlighting it for them so just they can notate.
Yeah.
But overall, I think your policy, you have it, and now it's what do we do with it, right? So Deborah, do you want to kind of close out with that piece so we can let them have a great evening and allow Andrea to finish packing?
Yeah, and what we do with it is that's the work. So Clayton, this is where and just take your time and present it back to your colleagues to have some discussion about it. And these are good topics to have some study sessions on with your group and have input, and just take sections at a time, because it's overwhelming when we just presented that. I know you're like, oh my gosh. And so it's just pieces at a time, keep the elephant in mind. How do you devour an elephant? One bite at a time. That's how you do equity policy.
You don't.
You don't. But we're not going to say you don't on this one, Bertie. You do, but one bite at a time. And so again, thank you guys again so much. It's been a journey for us, and we're still your thought partners. You have any questions? We don't disappear just because we don't have anything scheduled, and this is continuous work. So you just kind of think about your next steps on what you additional support that you may need from us, or just support that you will need, just so that it doesn't stop. You don't have to be left doing this on your own. And so we're here to support you as well. So thank you again for staying engaged and really focusing on this important work. And you're well on your way to being that equity focused driven, because that's what you want to be. You want to model that. So thank you again so much.
So Nicole, let's just try to connect at some point and figure out what other options for support facilitation might be available for us, in step 3.
Absolutely.
Step 3
Yeah,
through 10.
absolutely.
We've
I
taken 1 and
know.
2, but we've got 7
Yeah.
more ahead. So
Absolutely. Yeah, COVID kind of stole a year from us of what we originally planned. So I do want to say that we made some adjustments because of COVID and not being able to do some in person. But definitely we can talk about some additional support around you all evolving your equity statement, your plan as you all get ready to utilize the steering committee and, evolve that process, bring your stakeholders in. We can definitely support some of the even stakeholder listening sessions. We can do some equity walks, which Deborah and I love to do, just
Yeah.
have you kind of go in and, what does it look like in action, right? Sometimes board members don't get to go into the schools and see it,
that'd be
right?
great,
And
yeah.
then know kind of that context. So that's one piece. And we can also observe your board meetings and give you
Mhm.
feedback and do a little coaching around that. Sometimes that's really helpful when you're in the trenches, time to do this work. So there's a lot to be done. There's definitely more
Yeah.
steps, but I love that you all have a bridge and a platform to kind of jump from. And you've done a lot of work in 4 sessions and literally a virtual space with 3 hours, which is very limited. So you all have accomplished a lot, believe it or not.
Mhm.
So you should be proud of your work and thank you for being, as a board, being so supportive of your superintendent. This means a lot. Superintendents have the burden of doing the work. They're principals, you name it, and all the staff have to do the work, and you're the visionaries. And so you supporting Bernie and his staff is going to be super important as it gets tougher. And so Deborah and I will be watching up close or from a distance, either way, to cheer you all on, because this is important work. And Bernie, be very excited. You have a great board who believes in this
Yeah.
work and has the vision and has kind of opened the door to really take it to next level. So we're just honored to be thought partners and lock arms with you. And so thanks for having us, and hopefully we'll get to see you in person one day.
Yeah.
one day
One
soon.
day.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Nicole and Deborah. Your time is invaluable, and we're so grateful that the lines of communication are going to continue to stay open between us, because, like you said, it's a lot of work, and tedious work at that. So thank you for your continued support, Nicole and Deborah. We're so lucky that you are able to do this with us and build with us. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, do you want to adjourn our meeting, Ms. Manu?
Yes, I do. I will adjourn this meeting at 9:39 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Look at one.
Night.
Have fun. Be safe.
Be
Stay encouraged.
safe.
Thank
Have fun in
you.
Maui. Yay.
Likewise.